It's been said television is the new movies. To celebrate that, we're spending so much time on HBO Max this week. They should be sponsors of the show. First, we break the rules, just like AT&T is doing with the theatrical model, and review a season of television. First, we're discussing whether the Watchmen limited series should go into the Pantheon or not. So without any further ado, we are going to start by talking about the 2019 Watchmen television series.
We are no one. We are everyone. And we are invisible. Tick, tock, tick, tock, tick, tock.
We convinced ourselves that they were gone, but they were just hibernating.
Tick, tock, tick, tock, tick, tock.
They came for everybody. Oh, please.
Are we safe?
I guess we have ourselves a reckoning.
What are you two talking about?
Oh, nothing. Just the end of the world.
Tick, tock, tick, tock, tick.
This is the Superhero Pantheon. On this podcast, we take one superhero film or television season, in this case, a week, and decide whether it should be in the Pantheon, the pile of shame, or somewhere in between. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast apps through the real world. We strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5-star review so as to help people discover this show and the great work that the folks at the real world are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you could do so by finding us on Twitter at Hero Pantheon. My co-host for this week and every week will be Brian DeBrain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. Brian, this is the first time in about 6 months that we have done a new episode of this very podcast series. We wanted to take a break because of the lack of current superhero content. We didn't realize that we would be going this long without it, but we definitely wanted to, before the end of 2020, before this hellscape of a year ends, wanted to discuss the Watchmen television series. And this does break the format of the show a little bit, because we have typically only discussed movies. Everything that has been put into the Pantheon or the pile of shame up to this point has been movies only. It is Brian and I's opinion that this is one of the first pieces of television superhero content that deserves to be discussed as far as whether it should go into the Pantheon or not. And I think there are a number of ways that you can evaluate a television show. You can do individual episodes, you can do seasons, or you can do the entire run of a show. Now, Watchmen is apparently a limited series. It may return at some point, but for right now, this is considered a limited series, so that is another reason we feel we can evaluate it on its totality. And there have certainly been very good seasons of superhero television. There have been good episodes, but I would have to say that in my view, this is one of the first that I've seen that is worth it. I think we may go back and evaluate the Harley Quinn seasons as well. I think those could also be contenders as well. But I know we wanted to talk about Watchmen 2019. So, Brian, I'm going to let you talk because I've been talking for like 5 minutes. So go ahead.
Yeah, it shows you that how much TV has transcended the medium. You know what I mean? Like before this kind of quality programming, it was like what? Twin Peaks, and that was kind of like the precursor to that, and then HBO started going premium, and then you started getting premium programming on TV with The Sopranos and all that stuff. But somehow, I don't know, with the Netflix push in the last 10 years, it seems like TV's risen above movies, right? And everyone's talking about more about shows than they are movies, I think, now. You go to Hot Topic, and you see more. I think it's more TV stuff than it is movies. And I think if you would have gone maybe 5, 10 years ago, the opposite, more mainly movie stuff, less TV. But because of the rise of Netflix, all these streaming services, it stepped up the game of everybody. And we know that Amazon is producing amazing stuff with The Boys. It's another possibility we can review down the line. But right now, I think Watchmen is a great starting point. It's just one season. Every episode is a banger, arguably a banger. But it just feels like because of the level and the creativity and the thought process they put into the show, especially Damon Lindelof, who I've been kind of critical of before, because I'm not a big fan of Lost. I watched that pilot and I kind of saw what was going to happen. I was like, okay, they're not going to answer any questions for a long time. And when they do answer some questions, it's not going to be the answers you wanted or expected. And it's going to be weird. And by the end of it all, you're not going to know what's going to happen. And that kind of happened with Lost. So I was kind of skeptical when going in, knowing that Damon Lindelof was writing this. But then I kind of remembered, like, this has kind of been in production for, like, almost, I don't know, 10 years, I want to say. Because I've heard that HBO wanted to do a show on Watchmen ever since the movie came out, which was, what, '09. So I've heard about this since 2010. I was kind of skeptical because at first I thought they were just going to remake the whole thing and then do each episode as, like, you know, one comic or one chapter from the comic is going to be one episode. They totally went against that and did a whole new interpretation of, not totally new, but it's more in line with the comic than it was the movie. And the way they pulled it off and the little intricacies and details and all the little Easter eggs for the people who read the comic and saw the movie, all that kind of thing. It's still probably a little tough for some non-superhero, non-Watchmen fans to get into, which is understandable because there's just so much backstory. Because you try, like, explaining this plot to people and you have to rely on the plot a lot from the first or the comic. So it's kind of an acquired taste, I want to say, but I think if you sat down from the first episode and kind of just sat through it and kind of just, you know, accepted for what it was and didn't even read the comic, I think a non-casual fan could sit through this and enjoy it and just be blown away by it the way we were. And that kind of reflects that, I think, it had good ratings on HBO, and not everyone who watches HBO is like a comic book fan, you know what I mean? And even though this is based on a comic, it still had a lot of buzz. It was really, like, you know, the talk of the town last year. People were wondering if there's going to have a second season or not. There's been a debate about it ever since then. I'm kind of on the fence about it still. Depends on what they do, depending on the timing of the politics involved. It's been a year, and it's been a crazy year since it premiered. So, based on what's happened this year, you can certainly see, like, some case to make a second season based on just the shit that's happened this year. But credit to Damon Lindelof, because he kind of called the mask thing way ahead of everyone else, unintentionally, even though that's more for protection of identity. You know, still wear a mask now because it's to protect everybody.
The one thing I will say, as far as Damon Lindelof goes, is when it comes to Lost, I think I was very skeptical of that show and of him as a writer, because I think he's been involved in a number of projects that have not necessarily gone well, including the Star Trek sequel, doing some work on Prometheus. So I think there's a little bit of a history there. I think, though, The Leftovers is a show that is legitimately one of my favorite television shows of all time. At 28 episodes, 3 seasons, I think it works so much better than Lost. It really does tell a finite, complete story, and it has kind of a satisfying payoff. And for that reason alone, I was not as skeptical of this adaptation as I was perhaps if I had not seen The Leftovers. But whereas I think the struggle for Lost was a network television show that did not have a definitive ending until it was done, or almost done, in season 4, season 5. So they kind of had to just fly by the seat of their pants. With The Leftovers, there was the opportunity to tell complete stories. And I think if you watch each ending of a season could have worked as a series finale. I feel the same about Watchmen. I think the way that this show ends, it is a definitive ending. There's a little bit of a tease of, and we can get into that, about whether, you know, Sister Night is able to walk on water. But the story itself, the story that they were trying to tell, ultimately does have a payoff. And what is so fascinating to me is that this series, Watchmen 2019, is a continuation. It is a sequel to the graphic novel, not necessarily the 2009 movie adaptation by Zack Snyder. Many story events and characters from the graphic novel that were changed or removed in the movie are mentioned or shown in the series, the most notable difference being the squid attack on New York, which was completely changed in the 2009 film. And the one thing I have to say is I really think that they did a great job of fully realizing the squid attack and making it seem like something that could be plausible, would have some sort of a continuation, and Damon Lindelof even had the balls to kind of use the squid as the solution to another problem in episode 9 as well.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like when we reviewed Watchmen last year, I was kind of like hesitant about the squid thing. I thought it worked because it made more sense in the whole nuclear war kind of aspect of it all. But the way they portray it, especially in episode 5, when you see Looking Glass's quote unquote origin, I guess they show the like not the exact blast from the outside, but you see the aftermath. And I think that's what kind of works. And what I never understood when I read it originally, I was like, a psychic blast. How do you, you see the carnage in the panels of the comic and everything, and what happened, and you can kind of see what the squid does, but to actually see the aftermath and to kind of see that force just go through the building when Looking Glass is in that mirror maze or whatever, and the amount of force it just projects, that kind of sold it for me. And I was like, okay, now I understand the whole significance and size of the attack, because he was in New Jersey at the time, and of course the squids dropped on New York. So you kind of do that. They do that pull away shot, which is beautiful, and you see the squid like on top of all these buildings. It looks like it's dead already, but you can see this, just people just lying dead, bleeding from their nose and head, and it's like, okay, that's a psychic blast. Yeah, it's piercing their head, and then the repercussions of that, unintentionally, it feels like Looking Glass got powers from it, because I think he can just tell when people are bullshitting or not. Not necessarily, like, I think that's a result of surviving the blast, because there's an underlying thing too about the blast, is where like, these people have like kind of like these residual effects, like they mentioned in that group setting where that kid was experiencing the trauma still from his mom, even though he wasn't even born. But he was born like way after the events, but his mom survived the events. The whole underlying thing of like possible psychic abilities out there that they kind of really didn't even totally touch on, but they could have like gone further with. So there's a lot of things to play with there, but I like the idea of what they did with it and the way that they stuck to their guns. Because I was pretty prominent, like I was really on the thing about having the nuclear war thing, because that just made sense. A nuclear bomb goes off, a whole squid coming down thing. That's just hard to explain to people. But the way they explained it in the show made perfect sense, and it tied in with the character of Looking Glass very well.
Of course, I also want to get into kind of how the show started. The very first episode, I think there's a pretty significant attention-grabbing moment. But first, we see young Will watching a silent movie called Trust in the Law about the U.S. Marshal Bass Reeves. This movie is fictional. Both Reeves is kind of based on is historical character, the first black deputy U.S. Marshal in the American West, working mostly in Arkansas and Oklahoma. And upon his retirement from the Marshal Service, he became a police officer in Muskogee, Oklahoma. Oscar Micheaux was a pioneer in the early film industry who made both silent and sound pictures about African American life. So that's where we start this, and the entire opening scene is kind of a dramatic showing of the Tulsa Massacre of 1921, which is one of the most important historical events that your history class did not discuss. The reason that it is not discussed is because it is what happened is essentially a bunch of racist white people ransacked the black community of Tulsa. Tulsa was once known as the Black Wall Street, the African American Wall Street. This historical event has not really been addressed in history classes, but not only did the 2019 Watchmen illuminate the importance of this event, but it was also referred to in another prominent piece of HBO media, that being Lovecraft Country this past fall. So I would make the argument that HBO has done a better job of educating the public on this unbelievably heartbreaking event than the United States education system.
Yeah, pretty much, because the people writing the textbooks, they're the ones kind of dictating the way history went and whatnot, and a lot of people kind of leave some things out. But I do remember, because I took AP US history, So, it was a little tougher than the usual U.S. history class, and I remember something about this, but I just couldn't remember the exact details because I do remember something about this, like in one of the slides and stuff, and how even I remember my teacher, Mr. Cameron, mentioned that like this is not really mentioned in your textbooks or whatever, but this event did happen and it's really important. And I do remember that. And then seeing this and then looking back and reading about it again, it's like, fuck, man. We criticize other countries for kind of creating their own history and teaching history a certain way, but we do it in this country too. So it's very disturbing, but it was a nice bright light to illuminate the past. It kind of learned from it, obviously, and a lot of people didn't know, man, and it kind of shook some people to the core a little bit. And now it's becoming this widespread thing where now we have to kind of teach it in history classes and whatnot. So HBO or Damon Lindelof, whoever came up with that idea, that story or that pivotal story point, it kind of changed history a little bit, unintentionally, intentionally, but it's very interesting the way that a show can just kind of change things like that.
I mean, it's worth pointing out that 1921, we might think of it as being very far away, but the 100th anniversary of that event will take place next year. There are people who are still alive from that era. They are over 100 years old at this point, many of them, but there are still people alive who could have either been there, witnessed it. That is something that I think we should not take for granted, that the history of this country, the level of racism and those kinds of issues, these are things that are still very prominent. And this is also something that comes up because in this universe, in the 2019 Watchmen universe, there is a multi-generational white supremacist order, the Cyclops, which started as a branch of the Ku Klux Klan. On the show, members of Cyclops signal each other by raising the OK symbol to their foreheads. Oh, the OK symbol is also a reference to white power. You may have seen some of your least favorite politicians making this sign in certain photographs. This evokes both the real-life white supremacist appropriation of that gesture and the mythological Cyclops. In the real-life KKK, Brian, Exalted Cyclops has long been a title in the hierarchy, another piece of popular fiction that played on the connection between the Klan and the mythological Cyclops was the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, based on the Odyssey, in which the heroes are robbed by a one-eyed salesman who turns out to be a Klan leader, a Cyclops in both senses. And fittingly enough, that movie starred Tim Blake Nelson, who plays Wade Tillman, Looking Glass in Watchmen. And I think that's something else that is consistent from the first episode until the 9th episode, is that they're not just talking about Tulsa history, they're not just talking about the level of racism that existed in the New York Police Department, something that episode 6 spends a great deal of time on, but they ultimately bring it to the present time, as Don Johnson's character, Judd Crawford, he has a Klan outfit in his closet, and it is barely hidden. And I think that this is something that maybe we should have all seen last year, but I think that those kinds of scenes and the things that I was witnessing were just underlined all the more. You cannot talk about the 2019 Watchmen without talking about these issues, the Tulsa Massacre, the level of racism, kind of the very complicated aspects of the police and the role that they play both within the context of the series and in the meta-narrative of how we see police officers in this country. This is one of the most politically prominent and present superhero shows/movies that I think we've seen in a very long time, because this show directly addresses a lot of issues, even though this is taking place in an alternate universe where Richard Nixon was president for 20 years and where Robert Redford has been the president for like 28 years.
Yeah, I did not expect this kind of like approach to it, because if you read the original, there's hints and underlying things about racism, but it never goes fully through with it. Here, they kind of take this different perspective. Well, Rorschach was an extremist, most likely a racist, and it kind of inspired a whole other generation of white nationalists that kind of took his doctrine, incorporated it with the Cyclops and the KKK doctrine, and thus you got this new generation in this universe. But, in today's world, I don't want to point fingers and names to other groups, but it's very evident that it's going on today, and it's like I keep telling people and they don't see it, and I try to point things out, but it is what it is, and if you don't see it, you don't see it, but it's going on today, and it's it's like I can't believe how on the nose that Watchmen got about this, and then how bigger it got in 2020. It's just I don't know. Someone had their finger on the pulse when it came to this because it's kind of scary right now, but the only thing you can do is just hope and fight on the good side of things, I guess. But yeah, the whole Cyclops and all that thing going on and the secret stuff, and it makes you think. It really makes you think what's going on today, and you don't want to assume the worst based on what you see in a show, but based on what we've seen on TV and news and the social media networks and stuff, it's pretty similar and eerie what's going on in terms of these groups going around that I'm not going to name, and groups like the White Cavalry. You know what I mean? So it's scary, but in a way, it does kind of make you look at the Rorschach character in a different perspective again, and be like, yeah, he is extreme, and he has these radical political views, and you can see how white nationalists can kind of go to his doctrines and beliefs and kind of like gravitate towards that, and and you can manipulate it, and that's what happens with people when they leave like a doctrine or some kind of like book or something, trying to tell people how to live their life, and when they're gone, people are just going to take it and reinterpret it, and that's what happened with Rorschach here in this universe. So very eye-opening stuff, because I think a lot of us, when we watched the original movie or read the book, were Rorschach fans, and after this, you kind of see like, I'm not really a Rorschach fan as much anymore, but it is what it is. It's definitely a learning tool for sure.
For sure, and I think the one thing that we can say is that Damon Lindelof's perspective on Watchmen is very different than Zack Snyder's. And watching this and watching the 2009 movie, I think it makes it all the more pronounced, perhaps, just how little Zack Snyder understood the source material. But in a way, Zack Snyder's vision of Watchmen was parodied a little bit, as Damon Lindelof created a show within a show entitled American Hero Stories. This is a parody of both Snyder and a number of series by Ryan Murphy, especially American Crime Story and American or American Horror Story. Lindelof said he wanted to have Murphy himself cameo on the show as the creator, but that didn't end up happening. That's a shame. Both American Horror Story and American Hero Story are also abbreviated AHS in their promotional materials, as they also share a main cast member. One of my favorite underrated castings, Cheyenne Jackson, who plays Hooded Justice on American Hero Story, has appeared as multiple characters in several seasons of American Horror Story. That is brilliant, subtle casting that I think just nails the kind of vibe that they were going for, and I really loved it. My other favorite bit of casting was bringing in Henry Louis Gates as the person who would help visitors at the Greenwood Cultural Center trace their genetic backgrounds. That is fantastic for a number of reasons, given that he actually has done this sort of thing as the host of the History, Genealogy, and DNA Tracing PBS series, African American Lives and Finding Your Roots. So I just thought that the level of detail in this show, by having this show within a show and also bringing in Henry Louis Gates, just fantastic in the level of details.
Yeah, that's the kind of vibe that everyone was getting, was that this whole show within a show thing. I mean, it's obviously an homage to the whole comic within a comic thing with the Black Freighter and the original Watchmen graphic novel, right? So you do it here, but you do it in a way where you're poking like tongue in cheek at the movie, poking fun at yourself, poking fun at Zack Snyder a little bit, poking fun of modern movies and the way that modern comic movies are made. You know what I mean? While at the same time, you kind of have this different tone in this surreal world, this more grounded real world of what Watchmen really is, compared to the over-the-top 80s excess version that we got in 2009. So it shows you like how, different directors, different people can take different works and interpret it differently. And just doing it in that kind of fashion was very brilliant, because it's making fun of yourself, and it's making fun of, the genre as a whole, and superhero movies in general, even though it's a TV show, but it was very, it was such a such a Zack Snyder fight sequence choreographed stuff going on with the fight with the FBI agents or the fight in the grocery store, and it's funny too because the way that, history is told, right? They're telling a version of the story with Hooded Justice fighting these supposed robbers in this store, right? But the real story is that Hooded Justice came from the back fighting a Klan member in the convenience or in the grocery store, and the whole story just changed for public accessibility, right? And changed it to like, oh, it was a robbery. It wasn't Klan members hiding in the back of the store. So that's another thing too, where it's just very little subtle things about how history is told and how it's retold, and just the way Hollywood makes shit up.
Well, I mean, there's always the whitewashing aspect, which you can never ignore when it comes to Hollywood because they have a history of doing this both with the way they portray something like what you saw in American Hero Story, or even some of the casting decisions that they have made, which makes the casting decisions of this show all the more interesting. Now we are going to go through our typical categories, but to call people heroes and villains is a little bit on the difficult side. So I'm very clearly, as much as possible, delineating between heroes and villains, and I think I've done a pretty good job of at least putting everyone in the proper category based on the context of this show. So I first want to talk about the Queen, Regina King, and I say Queen because she has pretty much done it all, winning Academy Awards, winning Emmys. She has her directorial debut is going to be coming to Amazon Prime very soon. She has a history of working with Damon Lindelof, as she was a prominent cast member in the second season of The Leftovers, had a small cameo in the third season. But Regina King has been someone who has had an iconic career at this point, has done a wide range of movies and television shows, and being cast as Angela Abar / Sister Night was pretty brilliant as far as I'm concerned. I think just the way that they were able to bring her in, she is a badass superhero. She's really horny all the time. She is a mother. She can fake being a baker. I mean, this is the person that I would want in this lead role, given the context of this show where you are trying to create something that is very present. I think having a black woman in the lead was the right way to go, and I could talk all day about how great Regina King is, but in so many ways I think she is the audience avatar, because she is the one that is kind of exploring what is happening, and in the end, she kind of plays a bigger role than she probably first thought of, because she's kind of the one that gets the ball rolling with Will, who we'll talk about later. But I just love the design of Sister Night, the costume. What a great costume. Just, she's involved in some great fight sequences. She comes off like a total hardened badass. And I love everything about Regina King, and this television show is no exception.
I love the portrayal. I love the way that in every episode you think you know what's going on with her, but then almost every episode after that, there's something new that unravels about her, and it's something new, and it's like peeling all these different layers off. You know what I mean? And unraveling like some of the mysteries behind her character and some of her origin and why doesn't she know about her grandfather and all this stuff. But the way it's almost like, I don't know. I've never watched Roots, but it feels like this is like kind of how Roots was, where it's like generations of pain passed down kind of thing until there's finally some kind of resolution and one of the descendants, and that's exactly what's happening here. I mean, one of the coolest moments I thought in terms of like her performance was when she's looking at her family tree, and then the computer asks her, "Do you want to see your great grandparents?" She's like, "Yeah, yeah, sure." And she's like kind of like emotional and taken aback by it, like I kind of got emotional seeing that too, and I was just like, "Yeah, man." I would be, if I was in her shoes, I would kind of be wondering like what my great grandparents were like and that kind of thing. If there was this big mystery about them, you know what I mean? But just little subtleties like that, and then being the strong, female superhero that she was, or quote unquote hero, cop, whatever you want to call her, and then just internalizing all the pain and hiding things from the audience in terms of like, she could have easily said some things and acted a certain way to kind of give us some hints and clues as to the whole Dr. Manhattan reveal. But the fact that no one kind of picked up on it until the moment it happened when it was revealed, Like, had no idea, you know what I mean? But the way she played it off and, like, just kind of held things back, and kind of hid things from, everyone else a little bit. And then it was a little frustrating. Like, just tell her, like, you got your grandfather and it was your grandfather, but she's hiding all these things. And, just the fact that she had to hide all the stuff and then it kind of reveals itself at the end. I thought that was great in her performance. And then, of course, reenacting her grandfather's memories and being in that place and acting like her grandfather and then switching off back and forth. Tremendous range, you know what I mean? Just tremendous range. And then comparing it to when she's pretending to be a baker in the first episode and trying to keep cool with those kids, you know what I mean? Just a totally different range. And you got to act a certain way in front of certain people. You can't reveal certain things in front of certain people. The whole idea of hiding your identity, all that kind of stuff just played into the performance, and it made it complex and this mysteriousness to it that gets revealed and revealed even more, to the point where it's still a mystery by the end of the last shot of her foot. It's still a mystery about her.
Right, and I think we have to talk about Yahya Abdul-Mateen II as Cal / Dr. Manhattan, and I was a little curious as to why they cast him after a few episodes, because he is much more so of a supporting character, and really the biggest monologue that he has is when he talks about life after death, and it is a bit ominous that he talks about this idea of after you die there's a lot of nothingness, which I definitely felt Damon Lindelof there based on some of his previous work. But what makes this so fascinating to me is that he gives this monologue, and if you're watching this the second and third time, that is definitely a major hint that this person is Dr. Manhattan. There's also the fact that Laurie Blake mentions an attraction to him. I think those are all things that work out very well. But basically, at the end of episode 7, it is realized that Angela and Cal are hiding a secret. The fact that Cal is Dr. Manhattan, and you get this moment where she hits him in the head with a hammer a few times. And episode 8 is the penultimate episode, is essentially their love story. It is kind of a 50-minute version of their 10-year journey as a couple. And I think there are a lot of tremendous episodes. I would argue that episode 6 might be one of the very best episodes of television that has aired this decade. But I think the reason that episode 8 stands out is that it is not only a flashback episode, but also gives us some very necessary information to lead into the finale as well. And it really, basically, episode 8 brings everything all together. And you are taking Abdul-Mateen, who has basically been a supporting character, and he essentially has to carry episode 8, and we don't even see his face for most of it. We see his hands, but we don't even see his face. And that is, to me, remarkable. And he is somebody that I'm very much looking forward to seeing what else they do with him. I'm very curious to see what his performances look like moving forward, what kind of films he is going to be in. Is he going to go back into the superhero pool, so to speak, or is he going to do a lot more independent movies? But the one thing I can say is, after watching him in this television show, I feel very confident in saying that he has the potential of being a very, very interesting performer over the course of the next 10 years or so.
Yeah, it's strange because he was such an afterthought up till episode 8. You know what I mean? It's just like his performance was just there. It was almost like deadpan at times, and you thought nothing of it, but it was purposeful because it's like you almost wanted the audience to forget about him until the moment where it's revealed that, oh my God, he's Dr. Manhattan. You know what I mean? Because it doesn't seem like he's Dr. Manhattan. He's just totally withdrawn and almost not there. He's just kind of like the support figure. But then his performance in episode 8 completely turned it around. You know what I mean? On his character and everything. And the way he portrayed Dr. Manhattan was very, very well done. In ways I think it's better than Billy Crudup. I felt he gave it more complexity, but more empathy, because you just felt bad for the guy because, I don't know, it's so strange knowing you're going to die in 10 years and telling yourself to forget all that. And then, you know what I mean? It's just all this stuff about being all-knowing, knowing your death ahead of time, that kind of thing, him dealing with that, and him explaining his history, and then the way he created Europa, or the city on Europa, all that stuff was just so fascinating. And it's just like, yeah, everything's clear now. And, looking back, there's all these different hints about it and whatnot. The stuff about the eggs and him cooking eggs and stuff. There's all these little hints and pieces there. So it's just amazing that I just didn't see it. Like, I thought, where's Dr. Manhattan? People thought it was him, and I just kind of ignored it. I just was like, nah, it doesn't fit. But he fooled me, man. The performance was just incredible in that episode. I thought he just kind of turned it around, and it kind of made me see like he's got this range. Because in Aquaman, he's just kind of there, and he's angry, doesn't have much to do. But hopefully, as Black Manta next time around, he'll have more to do and play with the role a little more, knowing that he's got this range. Because I don't know, man. It's dramatic, it's sad, but the whole character of Dr. Manhattan said, you know what I mean? Because he's a superhero that didn't want to be a superhero, and he's omniscient and all-knowing and stuff, and it's just hard to live like that, you know what I mean? And the way he explains it, and the way that he explains, like, even though he knows everything that's going to happen, he still goes with it, you know what I mean? Like, he knows that he's going to get caught, and he still goes along with it and gets caught, you know what I mean? It's just weird stuff, but that's the Dr. Manhattan character, you know what I mean? That's what you expect from him, because he's this complex god. So the way he portrayed it, I thought was really empathetic and relatable and sad, but that was the whole point of it all, because it's the end of Dr. Manhattan.
Right. I think the fact that they kind of softened him just enough to where I think the character is a little bit more palpable than it is even in the graphic novel. And I think a lot of the issue with Billy Crudup is not necessarily with him, but I think it comes down to the writing and kind of the way that the character is portrayed. So I think he would have just had a really hard time. The one thing I will say also about Dr. Manhattan is I'm glad that he was in the last episode, basically the last two episodes, and I think kind of restricting his presence kind of makes the show feel a little bit more tangible, a little bit more real. Let's talk about Gene Smart as Laurie Blake. If you are going to cast an older version of Laurie Blake, I cannot imagine a better cast choice than Gene Smart. Gene Smart has been in a number of Noah Hawley projects over the last few years, including a season of Fargo and Legion. But here, she gets to really kind of lean into the comedian aspects of Laurie Blake. Of course, she is the daughter of the comedian, and Laurie Blake has essentially become her father in so many ways. And I think that this echoes a lot of this idea that we ultimately kind of become our parents despite our best efforts. And the fact that she has even changed her name to reflect who her father was, Edward Blake. I think that this might be my favorite performance. I don't know. You could go in a lot of different directions, but especially in episode 3, just the energy that she brings is so different, and it's something so unique compared to Regina King, even compared to Tim Blake Nelson. Jean Smart is just on another level. She is not tolerating anyone's bullshit on this show, and I very much appreciate that. And I like the fact that she is kind of the one that uncovers a lot of this by herself. I love the fact that Angela and Laurie both individually figure out what's going on, but they do it separately. They don't help each other because their characters don't really get along. So I tremendously appreciated this. I think Jean Smart as Laurie Blake, just watching episode 3 alone, what a showcase for her.
Yeah, so the first time we see her is the opening where they fake a bank robbery just so they can catch the vigilante who's been going after bank robbers, right? So it's very like, wow, like I didn't see that coming. And of course it makes fun of Batman and the Dark Knight and all that kind of thing, like especially the opening of the Dark Knight. But from that interaction with that fake Batman dude, you can tell she's just fucking sick of it. She's fucking sick of these heroes. She's sick of masks. She's just sick of it all, right? And it's come to the point where she's like making fun of everything, and she's sarcastic. And that's where that comedian side comes in, because that's very much comedian. You know what I mean? He was just like, he went through Vietnam and all these different wars, and he's just like laughing about everything because he's just so numb to the core. And that's kind of what happened to Laurie Blake, where she's just seen so much shit. She's hiding the fact that she knows what Adrian Veidt did, which kind of ties into the ending of the show. And holding all that stuff in just kind of made her this cynical person, mixed with a little Columbo, Peter Falk. Because there was definitely some great Columbo-esque moments where it's like, she'll drop these like little like words or purposely use certain words. You know what I mean? Like when she mentions there's tire tracks, right, near Judd Nelson's body. But then, the first thing Angela Abar says is like, what kind of car was it? And she's like, oh no, it wasn't a car. It was a wheelchair. It's those little things that, okay, I see. You can kind of see where her mindset is. It's like she's thinking, man. She's kind of playing it like she doesn't know sometimes, but she really knows what's going on, and she's playing people. And I like that idea because it's almost like she probably had to do that the last 30 years, where she probably got demeaned, or you know what I mean, and like undermined because she was a pretty woman or whatever, and she had to get the respect of like being an actual good detective or working for the FBI or whatever. So she's probably just fed up and like, okay, we're gonna play this game. I'll play the game, and then she just catches him. And that's exactly what happens with Angela. That's what happens with the Seventh Cavalry. All these different things. Like she comes up with different ways to try to find the Seventh Cavalry, where it's much more logical than just going down and breaking people's doors down and just asking questions to random people that don't really know what's going on. And she's like, no, we're gonna look for clues and actually like find this church that all these videos are appearing in this church. Let's look for the fucking church. And like, yeah, why don't we look for the church? So it's these little things that I think her character is just super smart. It's a lot of like learning from the last 30 years, experiencing the whole, giant squid thing and keeping that inside. But eventually she changes at the end, and she even tells, Adrian Veidt at the end, like, people change. She did an excellent job, and I love the way that they shoot that episode in episode 3, man. Because, like, there's this one particular shot where you see this, like, Andy Warhol, like, print style of, like, the four Minutemen from the 80s. You see Owlman, Dr. Manhattan, Rorschach, and then you see Laurie Blake's head, where her image is supposed to be, but it's like centered perfectly of where the image is on the portrait. So just little things like that. The way that she's talking to Dr. Manhattan, it feels like that same kind of Laurie from, the comic, where she's just like had that relationship and she kind of gives into him a little bit when she probably doesn't want to anymore. So I like that little hint of like her kind of still clinging towards him when she's leaving those messages at the end.
Up next, we have Tim Blake Nelson as Wade Tillman. He is basically the Rorschach equivalent, I would say, just in the design of his character, his behavior. He is obviously not as politically radical, but he definitely has a history, and we see a lot of his weird behavior in the first few episodes, and then in episode 5, we get an explanation as to why he is the way that he is, because of the trauma of not only being a very religious person and basically being forced into trying to convert people, but ultimately gaining psychic powers from this. And again, so many of the thing that I love so much about this show is the way that individual episodes mean something. Like, there is an episode that specifically focuses on Laurie Blake. That's episode 3. Then you get episode 5, and they're specifically focusing on Wade Tillman. Yes, the other characters are there, but the heavy focus is on Wade Tillman / Looking Glass, and you see kind of just how paranoid of a person he is. And quite frankly, this is the perfect Tim Blake Nelson role, because he's able to play a little bit of a quote-unquote hayseed, but he is also much smarter than he looks at times. I love some of the interrogation scenes, just the visual design of this show. And I don't know if the credit goes to Lindelof or if the credit goes to kind of the directors and the cinematographers, but the way that this show looks, I really love it. And especially those early interrogation scenes really show off the kind of person that Looking Glass is. And again, I love that he is kind of the new version of Rorschach, but that he is much more palpable. He is not as extreme, and I think he is ultimately a character that you can kind of root for in the end, just because he kind of comes to some realizations about like what's real and what's not, and he ultimately like realizes and is able to figure out that the squid attack was kind of perpetrated by Adrian Veidt, and I wonder how much that will change him moving forward, because it feels like he gets, even more so than Angela and Laurie, it feels like Wade is the one who gets like all the answers he could have possibly wanted.
Yeah, it's very disturbing because like it feels like he had this. I mean, surviving what he survived. I mean, that's extreme PTSD, right? I mean, he's had these support groups, and like it's very like depressing, but he's just living through it. He's survivor's guilt basically, and he survived this massive incident where 3 million people died, and he's one of the survivors. That's a lot of survivor's guilt. So he's dealing with that. He's wearing tinfoil in his hats. That's why he's wearing hats all the time, because he's afraid of these psychic blasts. You know what I mean? And that's understandable. And like when you look at like the beginning of that episode 5, and it just makes more. It made all the sense in the world to me. Like, this is why he's like that. I totally understand. And like at first you kind of think like, what the hell is wrong with this guy? You know what I mean? Why is he sitting there in his mask, eating dinner in his chair alone when he doesn't have to wear his mask? You know what I mean? But he's wearing it because he's scared, and he has legitimate reasons to be scared, because that is a traumatic event that killed millions of people that he survived. So it's just one of those consequences that Adrian Veidt kind of overlooked and didn't really care about. Like, oh, if there's survivors, whatever. It's for the greater good. I saved the world. So, and then the whole revelation, seeing the tape that he left for Redford, that's been spread around, the tape from '93 explaining everything, and the way his eyes look, and everything is just kind of revealed. I thought Tim Blake Nelson just killed it in that episode, and I think it's my favorite performance. Just the way he's so haunted by everything and the traumatic events of what's going on, and the fact that he might not even realize it, but we picked up on it, that he probably has psychic powers and can tell when people are lying. Because I was like, how in the hell does he know these people are lying? And when like there's like, no, like they gave us tens, and they loved the commercial and everything, which was a great cameo by what's his name, Michael Imperioli, who was on The Sopranos.
I was gonna bring that up. Yes, Michael Imperioli is in a New York tourism video that we see in episode 5. It is both the worst tourism video that I've ever seen, and also one that is extremely appropriate. It is the kind of thing that I would expect a city to fund, because it's very cheesy, very goofy. I really want to see what The Sopranos looks like in the universe of The Watchmen. Maybe Michael Imperioli is the Don, and it's a shame also that James Gandolfini was not with us. Can you imagine James Gandolfini as Tony Soprano in those New York City tourism videos?
I'm pretty sure that was the idea initially. I'm pretty sure, because like I said, this has been in production for a long time, so they probably had something in mind. But I think what really kills me about that piece is that he says the line, "We like our shrimp cooked," or whatever, or no, "We like our squid cooked with a little pasta sauce on it." And I was like, oh, that is so, but that's such a line that a company would produce. I think it's so demeaning. It's so insulting to the 3 million people that died. But oh my God, that's typical. So credit to that. Wade Tillman, he's probably, yeah. I think it's my favorite performance, and I'll have to think about that until we maybe have some burning questions about it. But to me, the way that he just took the character, made it his own, and it just seemed like he was a haunted dude, suffering from PTSD and just trying to like play it cool. And he keeps telling everybody that he's fine, and you know what I mean. And that's exactly what a person in that situation would do, just to play it off, you know what I mean? And it's heartbreaking. And it's just like, it's very conflicting, especially with the revelations towards the end. And he finally just figures it out, and he just starts becoming a different kind of cop by the end. Because by the end, he's not even wanting to wear the mask or even wanting to wear the hat.
Definitely. There is one more character who is played by two people that we need to get into, and that is Will Reeves. First, we will talk about Lou Gossett Jr. We have talked about Lou Gossett Jr. If you go back and listen to our episode on the 1989 Punisher video, Brian and I sang the praises of Lou Gossett Jr. This may be Lou Gossett Jr.'s last filmed performance. That is a definite possibility. And what a way to go out. Just a very present, prominent role in this show. He is not quite a supporting character in the same way as Gene Smart or Tim Blake Nelson, but he is in a number of episodes and has a number of great scenes with Regina King. He is able to kind of manipulate and create the big moment at the end of episode 1, as he persuades with his machinery to get Judd Crawford to hang himself. But I do have to point out the other actor that plays Will Reeves. That is Jovan Adepo. Jovan Adepo is an actor who was on The Leftovers. And funny enough, on that show, he actually played the son of Regina King's character. And here, he is playing the grandfather of Regina King's character. So it's very interesting how that works. And even though he is only in one episode, he is only in episode 6, he is essentially the lead character on the show. An actor that we have not seen in any of the previous 5 episodes. Yet he is the lead actor, and I think that he does an amazing job of getting across the density of both the racial aspects, but there are also the sexuality. As much as he is critiqued for his blackness, his bisexuality or homosexuality, it's never made clear which. That is perhaps an even greater importance personally for what he has to go through, because it is what costs him being able to see his son grow up. And I think these two performances, they don't necessarily feel like one and the same, because there's such a dramatic age difference in who they're playing as Will. But these two actors, I do think individually do some fantastic work, and just the confidence that Lou Gossett Jr. has compared to the way that Adepo's Will Reeves is. There's definitely some differences there too.
Yeah, Hooded Justice, as I remember in the comic, was just always portrayed and thought of as the white dude, and he probably died as that muscle man or whatever dude that was found in the river. They show that scene in the show. But I love the whole reinterpretation of it, and the fact that it's obvious, yeah, the like, he was hung with a noose. So yeah, it's just like, yeah, of course he's a black man pissed off, and he's, just trying to seek justice, man, and that's fucking, it was just surreal. It's just surreal, and I couldn't believe that, they cut him down. I was like, wow, they cut him down. They're gonna regret that, and yeah, he got them back. And I was just like, when he shot those dudes in the Cyclops and burned their factory down, I was like clapping the first time. I don't know about you, and I know that sounds bad, but I just felt so cathartic to see that and that build up to that moment, and like he's just struggling to, because he sees the movie as a kid, like, trust in the law, and he can't trust in the law to get the job done, man, and it sucks, but it's going to be this eternal struggle for some people, weathering that line. You know what I mean? You're a cop, but the people around you don't support you, and they're assholes too, and they're cops. What do you do? And, it just becomes this whole complex situation that, takes them down this essential rabbit hole of like Cyclops and all this crazy stuff going on with the mind control stuff. And just the whole complexity of it all with him being, he's probably a gay character, I would say, because it seems like, he had no interest in his wife at all, but it was just the baby he found, and they were raised together, and of course they're gonna have that strong bond and relationship, so that's probably the source of their marriage or whatever. But it's very just surreal and complex, because like the thought process of him having this affair, and then just the fact that they have this stuff, and they even make all these other different hints too, that he had the affair with Hoover, and all this other things going on and stuff like that. And then you get this resolution. It's very subtle at the end, but he gets the house from him, right? Because I guess he felt bad because he didn't help him with Cyclops. So I guess he left them the house, and that was the kind of resolution. But that's another sad situation right there, because they seem like a couple that probably could have been a real couple in today's world. You know what I mean? But because of the circumstances, so that's another layer to it all. But just the fact that Gossett Jr. was able to portray him as the old man, and us, seeing the difference between an old man and a younger version of himself, it's always going to be like, man, that person changed a lot. And they certainly showed that here. It almost seems like he's a different person from before during the Cyclops stuff and all that kind of thing, but learning and growing. And then by the time Dr. Manhattan comes back into his life in 2010 or 2009, it's a whole different ballgame. But I think Lou Gossett Jr. just killed it. I think he was, I don't know, just something about him, man. Something about him playing that old man, just sitting there and just doing the Yoda gimmick, you know what I mean? Just like asking questions or answering questions with questions, and like not giving straight answers, and like, I have to give it to you in pieces because your brain can't handle it, kind of thing. And I thought that was just great. And the whole arc of him in episode 6 was spectacular, and that whole origin story. And he's pretty much, I mean, they kind of take elements from the Superman origin story. They even like reference it directly, Action Comics number, whatever it was. I think Action Comics 1 or whatever with Superman, and you find, and the parallels to it about how, Clark Kent was like, not abandoned, but sent off by his parents to survive. Same thing happens to Will Reeves. A lot of those parallels, and I love how all the superheroes kind of look to Hooded Justice as the OG of like the superheroes and stuff, or the, the hooded vigilantes or whatever. And little did they know that he was a black guy. And it's very like, It's great stuff. That's kind of like why a lot of people like the whole dogma thing. Jesus wasn't white. Jesus wasn't white. He was black, and the whole hypocrisy of it all.
Yeah, and they do this both with the character of Hooded Justice, and ultimately they kind of do the same thing with Doctor Manhattan. It is a fascinating way that they do this. So my score is a 9, and I think a lot of the reason that I'm not willing to go the full Monty here is I do wish that we had gotten more of Cal, specifically Cal. I wish we had gotten a little bit more with him, and to an extent, even a little bit more with Wade Tillman. I am a firm believer. I really love the idea that this was a limited series. I just kind of wish it was 12 or maybe even 10 episodes instead of 9, because it really felt like we were rushing the last 2 episodes especially. I wish it hit just like the comic was 12. I wish this had been 12 and we could have gotten more with different characters. But nonetheless, I'm going with a 9.
I'm gonna go full Monty on this one because the amount of time and effort to come up with these character arcs and their journeys and like what's Laurie Blake up to now, you know what I mean, like that whole idea of what's she doing now, and then like let's come up with a character based on what if Hooded Justice was black and he had a granddaughter, that kind of thing, and it's just the amount of time and effort and to reimagine what Dr. Manhattan looked like and what's he doing now, and then you add in Looking Glass as a tremendous character there. So overall, I think normally I would have given it a 9, but because everyone is on their A game, it really feels like everyone's on their A game. It just took it to that next level. That's why I got to give it a 10.
Let's go to the villains. Don Johnson is Judd Crawford. Damon Lindelof finally got his dream of killing off a major character at the end of the first episode. It was supposed to happen at the end of Lost. It did not. Instead, it definitely happened here, as Don Johnson was an important part of the first episode. He was doing cocaine like he was on Miami Vice in 1986, and then he pieced out as Judd Crawford, and then the layers to the onion are slowly peeled away as it is revealed that Judd Crawford was perhaps a member of the Klan and was most definitely involved with the 7th Cavalry, just like his wife, played by Frances Fisher, Jane Crawford. We see them enjoying Oklahoma at first, maybe not so much enjoying Oklahoma, but it is ultimately revealed that they are very much racist in their beliefs, and their main connection is Joe Keane, played by James Wolk, who is perhaps best known as playing Bob Benson on Mad Men, but instead of Not Great Bob, Brian, we had Not Great Blob.
Yeah, that was disgusting at the end, and it backfired in a big way because I allowed Dr. Manhattan to teleport, Vite, and all them out of there. But yeah, it's just I'm not a big Miami Vice fan. I love the first 2 seasons when they were on Netflix 5 years ago, and then by the 3rd season it just got repetitive, and I just kind of get disinterested. And I really don't like the movie, the 2004 movie or 2005 movie. I was really disappointed with that. But I'm a big Don Johnson mark. I think that he's just got this kind of like, old school 80s charisma to him, you know what I mean? And it works here, man. And I felt like, man, I remember DMing you that night of the premiere before I even finished the first episode. I was like, Judd is probably the head of the 7th Cavalry. And you responded by saying, oh, you'll see. And I remember that. And then boom, he gets killed at the end. I was like, oh shit, where do we go from here? And then it was just like, okay, I guess you just can't predict a show like this. And I was right, and you couldn't. So I think that right off the bat kind of sets the groundwork for like, okay, anything can happen, because we're marketing the show as Don Johnson is one of the stars, and now he's gone. But then he had a big role in the second episode as well, in the flashbacks and stuff. But still, like, I thought he did a great job for the time he was given for this. I wanted more of him. But again, it's not meant to be in this case. But I think his arc is very interesting, because I had to like kind of pause a little bit, because when it's revealed that he's got a history and his grandfather was in the original Cyclops or whatever, I'm almost sure his grandfather was the one giving the speech at the beginning of episode 6 in the flashback in the dream. I'm like 90% sure of that, because they look very similar. I couldn't confirm that before we recorded, but just the little details like that, tying in his history. And his wife is a total bitch, and you can just read it at the dinner table. Like, even though she's playing calm and pretending to be the nice wife, you can just kind of see through it all. That's at least what I felt, and I was totally right. Laurie was right about her too. So yeah, just a little, hints and pieces there. You hate to see it, but and then Senator Keene as well, evil son of a bitch. Like when he gives the reasoning for why they want to take Doctor Manhattan's powers, and Laurie's like, "Okay, I'm listening. Is it because your daddy was in Cyclops too, and you have this legacy?" He's like, "No, it's getting really hard to be a white man here in America." And I was like, "Dude, that's exactly what you just said, but you just said it in a different way." And I was just like, "Okay, so there's no big reason why they want to do this. They're just straight up racist idiots." And I'm fine with that. I was fine with that explanation because I was like, okay, I was expecting this big, elaborate explanation, but no, she just gave you the answer, and you just gave her totally worded differently, but the same answer, and you just want to be racist and in power. So I thought it was like, okay, yeah, kill these motherfuckers, let's go. And then, he kind of did it to himself. I wanted more Don Johnson, but Keene was enough to hold the thing together. And then that whole thing at the end where he's like, I'll have some respect and not wave my dick around in front of everyone when I'm a giant blue guy or whatever. So I thought that was a nice little, again, nod and, joke to the Watchmen movie where you got giant naked Dr. Manhattan walking around. But yeah, just the way that, I mean, you can kind of figure it out by like the funeral, and you gotta, I mean, goddamn, John Johnson's body went through some shit in this fucking series. Like he got hung, and then his body's blown up after the fact. So yeah, man, his body goes through some shit, but he was a racist asshole, so he deserved it.
So the other aspect, the other antagonists, I put Jeremy Irons in this category, even though he technically does save the day again, but he is still kind of very much a villain. He is arrested for what he did, basically committing a genocide in the city of New York, releasing the squids. But the Jeremy Irons scenes are some of the highlights of the episodes because he is completely separated from everyone. Basically, only gets to act off against Mr. Phillips and the other person. I really love what Jeremy Irons brings to this role because it's so out there, it's so bombastic. Just even the conceit behind it, I think, works out tremendously well. I mean, you get a fucking fart joke, for God's sakes, involving Jeremy Irons. What can you even say?
The defense rests.
Okay.
You got that? You got that joke?
Yes, definitely. Just fantastic. Just fantastic stuff. I mean, Jeremy Irons is so good in this role that I can't imagine somebody else. And they tried to hide the fact that he was playing Adrian Veidt, but it was pretty much the worst kept secret. Even from episode 1, it was very obvious.
Seeing him in the casting, I was like, yeah, he's Veidt. And then when it was official, I was like, God, are they really? Because it felt like he looks like the older version of, I forget what his name was, from the Veidt from the 2009 movie. Because you could have fooled me.
Matthew Good.
You know what I mean? Matthew Good. Like, it would fooled me because I was like, is he playing the Matthew Good version? But he just made it his own, man. And some of it was like a little, I want to say Ric Flair-ish. Like that bombasticness you were talking about and that arrogance. You know what I mean? And him walking around in his underwear with a robe on. Total Ric Flair stuff. But just, slowly revealing, again, more with the layers and the revelations that, he's on Europa, which is a moon of Jupiter. And, he thinks it's a paradise, but he's slowly realizing it's a prison that he was, like, intentionally convinced to go to by Dr. Manhattan. And he's got, like, clones there that just grow. And it's just chaos. It's utter chaos. But he figures out that if he leaves a message on the satellite, we'll find him, and his daughter will save him. You know what I mean? Just craziness, like the whole concept of it all. But I loved it because you got everything kind of grounded in this darkness on, Earth with the whole thing going on in Tulsa. But then you got this fantastical thing going on where you got clones and like babies growing, and he's killing clones, and they just like have no souls whatsoever, and it's just surreal. And when the first time you see him kill a clone, when he burns the dude alive, and I was like, did he just burn that dude alive? And then you realize everyone's a clone of the same person. And then I was like, damn, that's fucked up. And then he just opens the door and then rips the fucking watch from his dead hand. I was like, okay, this is where we're going with this, and I'm liking it a lot. And it's dark and it's twisted, but it gives Jeremy Irons some fun, man, to just have some fun. And, he was clearly having fun with the role. You know what I mean? He's being this serious, pretentious, rich, genius asshole trapped in this place where he thinks it's a paradise at first. So I thought the whole concept was great. And when he finally leaves, man, he's like, that one clone that was supposed to keep him in check, right? He's like, Master, why did you have me wear a mask? Because I wanted a good a good what do you call it? A good rival, a good nemesis. And he asked, was I a good one? He's like, nope. And then just leaves him there, man. I just laughed my ass off when he did that. And then just the little hints of like the horseshoe and stuff. I gotta say one thing though, like that cake looked tremendous, and he hardly ate any of it. Each time they gave him a new cake, it just every time I see Watchmen now or an episode afterwards, I'm kind of looking for sweets because I don't think anything will replace the cake in my head.
Certainly not. And I think that one of the things that the show and the movie have not done as good of a job of is portraying the Vietnamese perspective. And if we are going to go in another direction, I would love to see a season two kind of address this. But Hong Chau's Lady Trio does give us some insight, as she is the daughter of Adrian Veidt, theoretically. Basically, the scene in which we see the conception is perhaps one of the more unique scenes that we will ever see when it comes to conceiving an individual, as basically she injected his sperm into her eggs, and that's how babies happen. And Lady Trio is a trillionaire who is basically a genius just like her father, and she is basically planning to do something similar as Adrian Veidt did in order to become one of the most powerful people in the world. And this level of megalomania is certainly something that I think we can better even see today in the year of our Lord 2020. But it was great to have Vietnam at least somewhat represented. I think there could be more, but I really appreciated her as a character, just because you're basically not sure how evil she is until kind of the last episode, even the last couple episodes, because she seems to be really she really is kind of going back and forth between being kind of a benevolent rich person and kind of being aloof and unaware of things that are happening. But again, another great performance. I can't really think of a single bad performance among any of the major characters. And all I can say is I hope to see Hong Chau in a lot more. Giving Asian characters more prominence, I think, would be a very good thing. And it was good to see her here.
Yeah, she was great, and it's almost like the sins of Vietnam. She's almost like almost as like she's this representation of all the sins that the U.S. did, and she's kind of like coming back for like that's kind of almost the way I interpreted kind of thing. Like when she's like, I wanted to bring Vietnam with me, and like her past history, and cloning her mother and raising her as her daughter, and planting like her old her old mom's memories into the clone, so she can relive those and become the same person. It's like I don't know. It's almost like she wants this kind of revenge, but it's not really revenge. What she's saying is she wants to eliminate all the nuclear bombs in the world and save the planet and clean the air and all this stuff, and that's why she wants Dr. Manhattan's powers. But it's almost as like it's the same, same side of this, or what's the phrase? Like same side of the same coin or whatever. Her and like Keen and all them, they want the same thing, right? But just on different ends of the spectrum, right? They want it for racial domination and white supremacy, and she wants it to save the world. So it's almost as like you got extreme right-wing radicals, right? And then you got an extreme leftist, borderline fascist, maybe? Because that's what she seems like she wants to do, is just create this fascist world where she's in charge and saves it. But it's just like, both are wrong, clearly. And it's hard for me to admit that, because I thought at the beginning Lady True was going to be this hero character, and she's like, oh yeah, like she's going to be the rich one and save everything and have, correct everything. And I was wrong about that. And turns out she was just as crazy and megalomaniac as Veidt was, but even in a more extreme version of it. So, and Veidt recognized that. So, because he even says anytime you want to take the powers from a god, you got to stop that person, because it's the hubris has gone to their head kind of thing. So she played that well. And then, yeah, I just wanted more of her, and I just wanted more of her scenes, but I think just timing and everything, and she didn't debut till episode 4, so that kind of limited her, what she can do. But I thought she did a great job in the last episode where she revealed, or they revealed everything and how she went to Veidt originally, and Veidt wanted nothing to do with her, and even explaining that she was her daughter or whatever, and all that stuff. And I thought it was really complex. And it just says a lot about the history of like the United States and Vietnam, and the fact that Vietnam was the 51st state, and all these underlying things going on, and the fact that she was totally okay with killing the Seventh Cavalry members and the Cyclops members, and I was like, yeah, I feel you on that one. So she's a very complex character, and we still don't know if she would have saved the planet or she was just crazy or whatever. But I think that's kind of the point of it all, because we're never supposed to know.
All right, Brian. So we have talked extensively about the heroes and the villains, spending the first hour and change just discussing these two categories. But let's get into the villain score. Now, for me, the one thing I will say about the villains is I don't think they're that well developed, but I think the performances are all very good. I still think they are very well written, even if there's not a lot of character development. And I think because of the kind of the side angle with Adrian Veidt slash Ozymandias, and just what a character and what a performance by Jeremy Irons. For all those reasons, Brian, I'm going to give this an 8.
I'm going to go with an 8 as well. It was hard for me because I felt like Lady True was a hero up until the last 20 minutes of the finale. Maybe that's just me having my biases or whatever, and just her hope for the best of the world and my hope for the best in the world and her hope to change the world. And because even fucking Looking Glass was like, do you think she's right? Do you think she will change it? What if she does? And Adrian Veidt's like, no, you can never trust a person trying to challenge a god and become a god. So that's the hubris of it all, and that was the theme of it all. So that was really interesting, because I was just convinced he was going to be the hero of the show at the end of it all, not to save Dr. Manhattan or something like that, because they were working together with the grandfather, Hooded Justice. So it just kind of turned things around and then kind of set up your expectations a little bit differently. So that was interesting. The thing with the cavalry is that when Senator King gives that explanation, like I mentioned, it was just kind of like, okay, I guess what they were going for is like they were expecting you to give this like really big elaborate answers to why they're doing this, to capture Dr. Manhattan and get his powers. But he ended up giving the answer of just, oh, we're just racist. And then it's, you know what I mean? So that's what kind of like, it's a little bit of, not a letdown, but I was just like, well, that's, typical racist mindset where, it's like a white nationalist and it's like, it's hard to be a white man in this country now. And all of a sudden, you want to steal this dude's powers and whatnot and trying to convince yourself it's for some other reason other than just being racist. So, and the Veidt thing's interesting too, because, he was the obvious villain in the book, in the movie. Here, he does save the day. So it's very hard, but he does it in such a kind of an evil way, relying on the old tactics of the initial squid disaster. So it's tough, man. But I guess that's kind of that gray area that Lindelof wanted to play with some of these characters, depending on how you feel about him. But that's why I kind of went with an 8, just because the performances are good. I just, was expecting a little more out of maybe some of like the Keen stuff. And then Lady Troy, that was awesome, just not enough time on screen.
I would agree with a lot of what you had to say, Brian. And the thing that I will add to that is, I think that some of these storytelling elements, I think that get played up in some of the first few episodes. I think it does get lost by the wayside as we get into the latter part of episodes 8 and 9. Because by the time you get to those last 2 episodes, it's just a rush to the finish line, and I think that's unfortunate. And I think that is why I wanted a little bit more from the story. And when I say a little bit more, what I'm really talking about is just making this longer. I really do think, or they could have made the story a little bit bigger by doing 1, 2, 3 more episodes, as opposed to the 9 that they did. And I think that what makes this story so interesting is that when we first start out, we get Angela Abar. She gets caught up in this wild investigation of the 7th Cavalry, this white supremacist organization in the vein of both the Ku Klux Klan and eventually, as discussed, the Cyclops. And I think so much of what the show tries to do is cover the idea of intergenerational trauma. And this gets brought up as she explores her own history and who her grandfather actually is. Of course, her grandfather is Hooded Justice. So what that ultimately means for me is that she has gone through so much in her life, and we see a little bit of that in flashbacks when she is in Vietnam and she loses both of her parents in an explosion. Grandmother comes to see her and take her back to Tulsa, and then she has a heart attack and dies. suddenly. So her grandfather is the only blood connection that she has on the show. Even her husband is Dr. Manhattan. Her kids are adopted, so she doesn't really have a lot of a blood family. But it's really amazing how they are able to connect her and her grandfather, this idea of intergenerational trauma. And I think that's at the heart of what this show is really going for from a storytelling perspective.
Yeah, I've never watched Roots, but I've seen like the plot line of Roots, and it reminded me of that a lot. And they probably took a lot of that inspiration in terms of that thread of that storytelling, seeing the nature of how like the Tulsa massacre, and then all those events leading after that, leading to Angela Abar being in Vietnam, and that all the trauma that she has to go through. I enjoyed that journey a lot. The thing is like when you see the origin story of Angela Abar, you kind of have this gap that you talked about adding more episodes, but there's definitely a gap that they could have told a little more story with between the time that her grandmother dies and then she becomes a cop all of a sudden. There's that big gap in between before even she meets Dr. Manhattan. So that's kind of, there's some storytelling elements there that they kind of skipped out on. But, I just, I wanted more of that. And I see what you mean by wanting more of that, because that's kind of what I wanted more too of. I wanted more Lady True. I wanted more, maybe a little Adrian Veidt instead of all these time jumps. Maybe it's a little, with the Adrian Veidt stuff, it probably would have been repetitive because it's just him killing clones for 8 years straight. But yeah, I just think that the way it was structured and not giving you all the details at the beginning and revealing it at the the big episode 6, which we'll talk about a little in a few minutes more. But yeah, that episode kind of like set the stage for me for like, okay, this is definitely a different, a way different superhero experience that we've ever had on film or screen or anything on TV. So in terms of that, like I was really impressed with the way that Damon Lindelof put the story together and incorporated all these different things, and especially having like the whole root story behind it all. You know what I mean? 4 generations practically. So it's just crazy the way he was able to thread this needle together with all these different storylines to create this original story, mainly about Angela Abar, who has almost nothing to do with the original Watchmen, other than this Hooded Justice origin story that came out of nowhere pretty much. It was just really cool because I don't think a lot of people were expecting that going into the series. I bet people were expecting more of like Dr. Manhattan type stuff, what's going on with Adrian Veidt, all this stuff. But then all of a sudden you got this new original character that kind of ties into the whole Watchmen mythos as a whole. So I thought all those elements, putting it together, was great. The only thing though is what's tough is like explaining this to Watchmen fans or people who are not familiar with the comic. It's kind of difficult to explain the whole origins and like where the main characters are and what the heck is a Dr. Manhattan. So that's a little difficult. So that's kind of like it was my similar criticism of the storylines in Endgame. Despite how awesome those reactions are and how deeply emotionally invested you are in that 10-year storyline, showing it to someone who has no outside knowledge of it, it's kind of tough to introduce it to them.
Well, I think we can both agree that movies and television shows have increasingly been going with more comic book oriented storylines. And what I mean by that is, you're in a situation where the comic books are ongoing and they have their own continuity and they're telling their own stories. And it feels like increasingly more and more movies and television shows are doing that as well. The idea of that it is all connected. And I think we're seeing that with Star Wars even. We're seeing that with Marvel, of course. We're not seeing that as much with DC, but we're certainly seeing it with this 2019 Watchmen. I don't know. I think there is an appreciation you can have of the show, even if you've not read the graphic novel. But I certainly think your enjoyment it must be enhanced by knowing what's going on. And in talking about intergenerational trauma, I think we have to talk about Katie Laurie as well, as she is now working for the FBI. It is implied, this is how it comes across to me, Brian, is the implication that I am getting from this part of the story is that Katie Laurie is working for the FBI because she got nabbed for being a costumed hero, and she eventually just kind of does it, and she spends a lot of her time exposing masked vigilantes especially when they go into the bank. And it cannot be a coincidence that they were very clearly going for some Dark Knight imagery in that particular scene. But Katie Laurie is basically your hard-boiled detective that you would see in a film noir or a book noir or something like that. She has basically become her father in a lot of ways, again, by working for the government, her kind of saucy sense of humor, as I will call it. And she's kind of suspicious of Angela, but she is the one who figures out what's happening before being taken by Crawford's wife. One of the things that I really appreciated about both Katie and Angela is that they both figure out what's happening, but they both do it on their own. And I really appreciated the fact that they didn't just try to shoehorn these two characters together. That they got to go on their own individual journeys. And by the end, they both know what's going on, but at the end of the day, they did it on their own.
Yeah, there was a tease that they were going to team up when they were at the gravesite, and there wasn't that kind of chemistry there. I mean, there's obviously chemistry of them as like nemesis and like kind of like enemies, and they're like throwing like these snarky remarks at each other and stuff like that. But yeah, it would have thrown the story off if they were to like join up and team up. You know what I mean? Because their personalities just don't get along, and it wouldn't make sense to the plot. So I'm glad they did that. And with Laurie, it's just like it's so obvious she becomes her father, and it's just I love the portrayal because it's very different than the one we had in the movie. Totally like it's a totally different person from the movie and this. So I can imagine if she did the movie, like let's say she was the same age as what's her name, Malik Anchorman or whatever.
It's Malin Ackerman, and Malin Ackerman is easily the one of the biggest miscasts of that movie. Even people who like it, I think, generally agree on that.
Right, and I agree now for sure more than ever because like if she would have played it then, it would have been a completely different portrayal and less naive and less like ditzy and not knowing what the fuck is going on. Like this Lori knows what the fuck is going on and she's on her senses, and she's very very Columbo-ish, but also very smart and like sassy, and it's kind of sad. But then at the same time, it's like, well, she's just kind of sick of this whole masked superhero bullshit. So no wonder she's at this point in her life where she's trying to take down these vigilantes and doing a Dark Knight parody in the middle of it all, with the bank robbery. That was great. That was just so tremendous. But then I wish they did a little more of like talking about her father. But I guess they're trying to avoid that because they did a lot of that in the movie and the comic. Maybe she's just beyond that and doesn't want to talk about it anymore. That's why she didn't talk about it on the plane. And it was the other guy that gave the backstory. I get it. She's just kind of sick of it all and she's kind of trying to move on. But she can't let go of her past because she's still in love with Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah, I'm almost glad that they stayed away from the topic as much as possible because I think it's territory that's already been discussed more than enough. And especially when you are talking about issues of sexual assault and rape, as this circumstance certainly warrants, I don't think that it's worth getting into it unless you have something additional to say about the topic, and I don't think that that exists. I think as much as I really appreciate episode 6, I really do like episode 3 where they focused a lot of their attention on Laurie Blake. I also really liked episode 5 because we did get a look at Looking Glass. We did get a chance to kind of figure out what makes him tick, and I think what makes Wade Tillman tick is a clock. Because he, in fact, as the clock was turning midnight back in 1985, he was going on a religious crusade to basically try to save people. And because he was in a house of mirrors, he was able to survive the big squid attack. And I think, from a storytelling perspective, I think the argument that this show makes, that makes strongest, is the idea that the squid attack is actually good, and I was definitely not convinced of that before I saw this show. So I was just tremendously impressed with how they visually portrayed the squid attack, and also some of the ancillary elements with Adrian Veidt kind of using the squids even more and more, and them going full meta and kind of attacking it for being repetitive. But in thinking back to Looking Glass and just what that episode has, like, there's some great little moments in that show, In that episode, we mentioned Michael Imperioli, but they also have this conversation about like Spielberg doing like a version of Warhorse that is in this universe instead, and how it won all kinds of Academy Awards. Because I mean, that's definitely something that would happen. We would definitely get major movies about an event like this, and I think that that is really fascinating to see that just how fiction would portray it, and just what this universe would look like. And I know that this was more in some of the written material, but Brian, what do you know what the MCU equivalent? Because they're not talking about superheroes, but do you know what the equivalent is in the 2019 Watchmen movie?
I don't.
So apparently it's pirate movies, and a lot of that has to do with the Black Freighter and the connection to that. But I guess there's the pirate universe in the world of Watchmen, and I think you even see that as some of the kids were playing pirates in one of the scenes.
See, that's the level and attention to detail that just goes to show you, man. There's a love for the original work and how much detail the original work had in the graphic novel. So they're applying that to this, and that's really appreciated because I couldn't even see that detail. But I noticed other major details, but not like that. Like just me picking up on the fact that Wade Tillman probably has psychic abilities and can tell when people are lying. I mean, it's not like obvious at first, but then by the second go around when he's observing the people behind the screen at his regular job, he's just everyone gives 10. They all love the product. No, they're all lying. They don't want any of this. And it's like, how do you know that? I know. And then you just see it. And then what I like too about the Wade Tillman thing, it's the same thing that I liked about Endgame in the beginning when they approached the whole devastation and the whole thing with the squid, and they treat it like a real world thing, and you see like the group therapy sessions. I was like, oh, that's a good level of detail. You know what I mean? Because that's definitely a thing that would happen with these these survivors coming together with this traumatic stress and trying to heal them, with each other. So I love that level of detail. I love the fact that the whole thing with his hat, he's still wearing a hat everywhere, and it's got that, mirror foam or whatever, like cover vinyl or whatever, to kind of prevent any other psychic attacks. And then in the group therapy session, the guy mentions, like, I don't want to be one of those people wearing those hats. And then you see Wade slowly look at his hat for like a brief second, man. Little details like that, you know what I mean? And, like I said before, like the way that they showed the squid was just so realistic and convinced me, because I was not convinced that like a giant squid attacking New York was like a thing that should happen at the end of the original Watchmen comic. But now I see it the way they play it out. Yeah, it definitely, his effectiveness it really works. And then the whole alternate universe thing, again, I guess this is just like the Robert Redford thing, this whole other universe where you can just play around with stuff and have fun with it and just kind of go with it. So I love the whole, movie series within a movie kind of thing. It's great.
For sure. And of course, Dr. Manhattan, who is teased in the first couple of episodes as possibly being on a moon of Jupiter, is in fact hiding on Earth as a black man, as they are very much echoing kind of what happened with Hooded Justice in a lot of ways, with some of the thematic elements and just the tremendous continuity of the show and bringing this all together. And on the other side with the villains, you have Lady Trio. She idolizes Vite and saves him from the planet trap that Manhattan set him up on. And that is what kind of leads us into the final moments of the show, as I think what Lady Trio kind of represents is this idea of the benevolent billionaire, which is just not a thing. It's just not, and I think people have tried to make it a thing for quite some time, but the reality is that anybody who is a billionaire, there is no ethical way to do it, and I think that Lindelof is being very clear in what he is going for when he talks about that. So I really appreciated what they did with her character, and just a lot of the stuff with the racist cops in episode 6. I think episode 6 is almost it obviously falls within the continuity of Watchmen, but it is something that just feels of a very different pacing, filmmaking style, because it's in black and white and the camera is moving so much. We don't have a lot of the regular actors in that episode, so we're kind of relying on these other people. And I was tremendously impressed with just the individual episodes really adding up. And I have to say, Brian, that perhaps one of the most underrated aspects is the eighth episode. How long did it take you to realize that episode 8 is a pun?
Until I read it, I think the next day or I don't know, maybe like a week later. Because when I was reading it, I was reading it like a bar.
But it's a bar, and it's pretty great. That's pretty great.
Yeah, it's again, it's just the level of detail, especially with the eggs, which we'll talk about in a second.
Why don't you talk about the eggs? I mean, I've kind of talked about a lot of other things, but eggs, you could talk about kind of the important role that they play because they're not just in the last episode. This is something that is teased out over the entire season.
Really quick though, I want to mention the Dr. Manhattan storyline was great. I did not see that coming at all, and the way that the way that Veidt says the line, "This appropriation, it's 2009, John." I thought that was hilarious for obvious reasons. And, like I said, I wanted more Lady True. I thought they really could have dug deeper in the whole Vietnam thing. I thought that was so fascinating. And they touched on it with the whole bomber in Vietnam killing Angela's parents. I thought they could have done more with that, just, the time. For some reason, David Lindelof was obsessed with 9 episodes when obviously the clock strikes midnight, which I thought it was going to be 12. I was convinced it was going to be 12, and when I found out it was 9, I was shocked. So that kind of changed things up for me. But other than that, I just wanted more of Lady True because I thought she's such a fascinating character, and I love her performance. And it's very cold, but is she being like a bitch? I can't tell if she's being a bitch. Like when she's talking to that couple on the farm, and she's like, "If you don't take the baby, I'm just going to kill it." I'm kidding, or am I? And she's smiling. It's just great. Just great stuff. On to the eggs. So the egg thing was kind of right off the bat at the first episode. I think the first time you see Angela, she's cracking an egg, and the camera is underneath the bowl, so you see the yolk, right? And then at one point in that same episode in the pilot, you see that dinner scene with Don Johnson and his wife and the kids and all that stuff, and they frame it above, and there's this round ceiling, what do you call it, hanging ceiling thing, and it's shaped like a circle, right? And the way it's shaped, it's almost as they're inside of an egg, right? So there's more clues to that, and all the bakery stuff with the eggs. Every time there's an egg mentioned, making omelets, they mention, when she throws the eggs down, John, this is not the time for making eggs or whatever, and she throws the eggs down in episode 8. There's all these different things about eggs, right? The farm that Lady True goes to, that's an egg farm. Why are there all these eggs? It's about fertility, right? Fertility, it represents kind of the fertility of, Lady True's mom beyond who she ended up cloning. And then Adrian Byte's like, "You cloned your mother?" I told you he would say something. Great stuff like that. And then, of course, at the end, there's this, she drinks the egg, and then, you see this flashback of Dr. Manhattan saying, "I guess I could transfer my powers into some kind of an egg or something." And then you see the egg, and then you just start realizing, hey, there's eggs all over the place dating back to the first episode, and that's why Angela's a baker, and they really emphasize the eggs and the way it looks. Yeah, there's probably more details about the eggs that I can't even think of right now, and it's just even more subtle, but those are the obvious ones, and of course, the theme of fertility and all that stuff. Angela not having kids of her own, I don't know if that ties into that. They don't mention why, but, she's... And I think she's 45 when she meets Dr. Manhattan or something like that, or close to it. So that could be another subtle thing there, taking some adopting other people's kids. She was adopted on her own, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of details with the eggs and a lot of things that I'm probably not even picking up on, but those are just the big ones that are kind of obvious.
For sure. And I think that this story is very strong. Again, I really feel like there was a bit of a rush at the end, and I think that's kind of the only reason that I'm not willing to go the full Monty here. I'm going to give this a 9. I think it's really excellent. I think that there is a lot of very deep storytelling that's going on. This is a very ambitious television show, and I think it is to be admired for being so ambitious. Unfortunately,
I'm going with an 8 just because... all my cousins, all my friends, all the people who watched Watchmen, we were all into it. But then all the people who heard of the show that I tried to explain it to, it was really tough. You know what I mean? Because you have to explain one thing. In order to explain one thing about Dr. Manhattan, you have to explain all these other things. So that's my only thing. It's it's the end game effect. It's it's great that it's all connected, but it's just really tough to get a non-Watchmen casual person to watch this, even though HBO has that kind of audience where they'll just trust HBO, which I'm sure they grab those audience members too of the non-Watchmen casuals. You know what I mean? So, but just trying to explain the plot as a whole to people, it's just tough. So, I have to go with an 8. Despite the level of detail and stuff, it's just I feel like there has to be something that kind of like some kind of log line. You know what I mean? If you go to writing school or just if you try to explain this movie or a TV show in one line, can you do it? I don't think you can do that with the show, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad show. It's just so complex that it might not, be down with a certain audience, so to speak.
All right, let's get into the technical aspects of this. And when you're talking about a television show, I think there are certain expectations that arise that are maybe this is not as good, maybe it doesn't have a big budget. HBO and Warner Brothers very, very clearly put a lot of money into this. There are some great effects, both CGI and practical. Some very well done action scenes. I always think back to the first episode where they're going and the cows are there and they're kind of exploding and blowing up cows. I mean, I think just from the pilot alone, the action is just extremely well done. Again, going back to episode 6 and everything that Hooded Justice does, just a really well done, great work. And particularly, again, I think episode 6 is one of the best technical episodes that has ever been produced. I love the score. Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, they are perhaps best known for scoring a lot of recent David Fincher films. They did the score here, and this might be one of the best parts of the show. We really have not talked about the score, and I think we need to, because it's very propulsive. It's not even music at sometimes. It feels like sometimes like it's ambient noise, but it's definitely something that I could see somebody who is a writer like putting this score on and writing to, just because of how propulsive it is. I love Reznor and Ross's work. I think they have done just so much good stuff for David Fincher, and I really appreciate the fact that they came onto this show, which again, it is a television show, but I think their presence and the score that they've created makes it feel like so much different. I really like just how well paced the show is. Again, I still have some issues with 9 episodes versus 10 or maybe 12, but I really do appreciate the pacing. They give a lot of information in each episode. They really do a great job of just making every episode feel like it is important, and I think that's really appreciated in an era when some streaming shows don't have episodes that feel important because they're obsessed with creating the 10-hour movie instead of a 10-hour television show, and it maintains the integrity, the concept of the episode. So I really enjoyed the technical aspects, both from the special effects to the score and to the editing and the writing itself. So for all those reasons, I'm giving this a 9.
I'm gonna go with a 9 as well for similar reasons, but I want to point out specifically like the score is very much it feels inspired by John Carpenter. I can definitely hear Halloween 2, like the 1980 Halloween 2, and I'm a fan of that movie more so than most. And I know that it's not as like one of the appreciated Halloween sequels, but I think it's been having this cult following the last, I don't know, 20 years or so since my generation caught it on TV. So I think Halloween 2 has a very distinctive score that's more distinctive than a lot of other Halloween sequels, closer to the Halloween for 2018. And you can just hear it when it's like the creepiness of when you hear the creepy like synthesizer sounds. That's so Halloween 2 in the hospital. Like it's almost exactly like that. So I appreciate that. I mean, it just sounds so eerie in the right places in this series when they're going for the eeriness and weirdness. They play that music and I'm just feeling Halloween 2. And then there's these certain points in the series where it's like you hear the theme for Angela Abar when she's the Sister Night, and all of a sudden it sounds like Miami Vice a little bit, mixed with like some modern, I don't know, like modern techno a little bit. But I just thought, like, are they really going for a Miami Vice sound too because of Don Johnson? I don't know if that was intentional or whatnot, but I just see Don Johnson. You think Miami Vice, you think of that '80s score by Jan Hammer or whatever, and just like, okay, is this what they're going for? And it kind of felt like they were going for that too as well, for the style of it all. And not to mention the fact that you got the cops wearing these masks, right? But the fact that they're bright yellow, it pops right on screen, and that's the kind of color choices you need in something like this. If they wore black masks, it would not have popped nearly as well. The fact that the bright yellow, that's the yellow that we're familiar with Watchmen, perfect. That's exactly what we needed. The only thing though that I think I can kind of critique is that Tulsa feels small. I don't know if it. I've never been to Tulsa. I don't know the population or whatever, but it just the way it was filmed felt like it was kind of small, like a small town, and I don't know if that was the intention. Because at one point in the finale, when all the ice shrimp or ice squids are raining down on the town, Angela runs from like the middle of the town to the theater in like 30 seconds, and I was like, damn, she got there pretty quick. And then it made me think, like, is this town that small or whatever? And then you think back to the original in the opening sequence with the Tulsa massacre, and it's like, I don't know if the town's that big or is that small or what's going on. So that was my only thing. Like, I felt like Tulsa should have felt like it was bigger, but I guess just based on the location stuff, the way they shot it, it kind of felt smaller than it is. But that's just kind of my perspective on it. And then, of course, the use of color already mentioned, and then of course, the symbolism with the eggs and stuff, and the way the cinematography was just killing it all over the place. So especially the mirror shots, and when the squid attack happens and Looking Glass survives and all those mirrors are around him, and the way that it just beautiful stuff, man. I got to go with a 9. It's not a perfect 10. I feel like a perfect 10 would have been like even more brighter colors in certain parts, because like some parts of the show seem dark and they were going for that effect. I don't mean like dark in tone, but I mean like dark in like color and like lighting and stuff. But then sometimes you'll see like that when you see the elephant, right? The giant elephant that we haven't even talked about yet. It just looks like so like bright and brightly lit because it's, where Lady True is, like there's a lot of bright lighting. So I think they did a great job with that. Not exactly 100% perfect, but what they were going for, they landed it.
Yes, it was very impressive just to see how this was executed on a technical level. Even if you take away the story and you just watch this show on its own merits, I think it's still tremendously impressive. I really admire what they were able to put together. And, Damon Lindelof certainly gets credit, but you also have to give credit to Ross and Reznor for the score. I know Nicole Russell was an important director on the show, and just what everybody was able to put together, including the actors as well. What a great cast of people. And this show definitely got its just due. It got rewarded, unlike so many of these superhero movies that we have talked about, which definitely get a lot of popular acclaim and make a lot of money, but they don't necessarily get a lot of awards credit. This show did that. It won the Best Limited Series Emmy, and I think in recent years that has become a very competitive category, and I would argue that this is one of the strongest years for that particular category that there's ever been. And if you just look at some of the other shows that were nominated, including stuff like Mrs. America and stuff like that, I mean, it was just tremendously impressive what this show was able to do, that it won Best Limited Series in a very competitive category. Regina King also won an Emmy for her work as Sister Knight / Angela Abar. So Regina King, who has won a number of Emmys and an Academy Award, a true queen, nonetheless. This also, I think, Brian, for me, this felt like an event series. This felt like the kind of series that people were watching on a Sunday night live. And I don't know that a lot of shows have captured just the event aspect of television that I think we used to all partake in, or I think that that's gone away because of streaming. But this felt like an event that will not be forgotten anytime soon. And I think, again, HBO deserves credit for educating people on the Tulsa Massacre of 1921, and just the way that this show presents kind of these ideas of racial politics and police. Commentary on masks feels like a bonus 1 year later, but this was a tremendously impressive television show, and both because it is popular, it received very good ratings, it won awards, there is a historical element to it, so it is all the more relevant. For all those reasons, Brian, I'm giving this a 10, and this is the highest score that I'm giving. This is the only 10 that I'm giving for Watchmen, but I think that the legacy of this show is it is stronger than I think the show itself.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree. That's the other 10 I'm gonna give. I gave it 10 for the heroes. I'm gonna give it 10 here for all those reasons, but mainly it's just, you talk about how the Library of Congress selects things for being culturally significant. This feels more culturally significant than most of the movies in the Library of Congress, man. Just for all the, the racial themes, the historical themes, like teaching, teaching a whole country about an event from 100 years ago that people don't even remember, and the fact that besides it was must-watch TV on a Sunday, and you know, uh, if you throw all that out the window, just look at it for what it is as a series, man. It just it blew a lot of expectations out of the water, blew my expectations out of the water. I did not know what to expect, but once you kind of figure out the groove and the themes what they were going for by episode 2 and 3, it became a fun ride. You know what I mean? And it left you wanting more for sure, and that you definitely want that from any show. But it has this lasting legacy now for all the stuff it brought us. You know what I mean? And the fact they wanted to stick to their guns and do one season, one complete story, that also adds to it. You know what I mean? Because like you look at something like Band of Brothers, 20 years later, still beloved and looked at, and that's a limited series. You know what I mean? So that's just an example of like an HBO limited series that is remembered, and that's probably culturally significant as well, if you want to consider that too. Obviously historically, but this feels like more so for like modern generations, previous generations. This connects with a lot of generations for obvious reasons, and I think episode 6 will stand the test of time as like, I don't know, one of those episodes of TV that you kind of teach. You know what I mean? Like, I've said this before in previous episodes, but I think Breaking Bad was mentioned by multiple professors, the pilot, at least, by multiple professors in terms of editing and writing and stuff like that. So, yeah, episode 6, the Hooded Justice origin story, tremendous stuff. And I think that's what's going to help make it stick out most than all these other superhero shows.
All right, Brian. So my total score is a 45, and yours.
45 as well. We're just a point or two off in certain categories, but we're right at the main. We're right at the middle.
So that is a total of 90. So that means that we have put the Watchmen limited series, the first television show, into our superhero pantheon, joining a number of movies including Superman 1978, Logan, The Dark Knight, Avengers Endgame, plus a whole lot more. And I think this certainly has earned it, just based on, again, all the things that we mentioned with the legacy alone. This show has just really, I think, changed the way that we can see storytelling done with superhero. When you give it the right budget, it's not going to feel like, I think the Arrowverse shows, which I think are a mixed bag, but I think there is something to be said for doing this show the right way, by doing it with episodes that stand out individually, by giving it a budget, by limiting the amount of episodes. And look, I would like to have seen this be 12 episodes, but I don't want it to see 22 episodes. So I think this is a working model, and I think Disney Plus, I don't think they're borrowing from it, but I think they are headed in that direction by having a lot of their shows be 6 to 8 episodes and not necessarily be full hours. And I think that is perfectly acceptable in this era. So we may discuss future television shows as they come up, but I'm really glad that we were able to discuss this episode, or these episodes of Watchmen, because I think this was definitely one of my favorite shows of 2019. And even a year later, I think it is all the more relevant, and I think it's going to be I think it's going to continue to be relevant, and something that I want to rewatch.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be. I think it's gonna be taught in film schools and TV classes like for years to come, just in terms of just the writing and everything else. And it's just great to see. You know what I mean? When I think season 2, if there was a season 2, but I don't know. If you limit yourself to one season, you kind of like, you have to have full circle story, right? So I think limiting yourself with that kind of, if you just out there to make a show with possible seasons 2 and 3 down the line, leave all this stuff open, and then you might not even get to answer some of those questions down the line because your show gets canceled. In this case, they were like, okay, we got 9 episodes, we do everything we have to do, and Disney Plus is definitely using that model, because I think a lot of those shows, are just going to be one season, and that's all we need. Like, I do not want, for example, 2 or 3 seasons of a Cassian Andor show. One is going to be fine. I think, 12 episodes is already too much, I think, of a Cassian Andor show, but they're going to do 12. So we'll see. But it's one season, one complete story, and this is a way to kind of get past the problem of if you're going to do a movie about like a certain character in the MCU or Star Wars or something like that, and you're limiting yourself to 2 hours, right? This case, you can play around with it, do your origin story, do your typically first movies are origin stories, right? And you got that here, kind of in Watchmen. So, but then they kind of threw it in episode 6 as well. But what I'm saying is like you can do all that. You can do like your 3 movie trilogy in one season and just get it out of the way.
Yeah, and maybe we can get into the Marvel stuff very shortly after we discuss Wonder Woman. Maybe we can get to that. But let's get to the burning questions for Watchmen. Favorite episode? Is there any disagreement here? I believe we're both going to say episode 6. And as great as episodes 3, 5, and even 8 are, I mean, 6 is clearly the winner.
Yeah, 6 is the best. 5 comes really close for me just because it's Tim Blake Nelson's haunting performance in that. And I don't know. When I picture Looking Glass, I don't even picture like the mask. I just picture his face and it's like his sadness and the PTSD of it all. But besides episode 6 being spectacularly directed and written and all that stuff, you got to shout out episode 5 for having an incredible grounded performance with a guy who looks like he's suffering. And I appreciate that from Tim Blake Nelson.
And I also want to give credit to the pilot as well, episode 1. I think pilots are notoriously very difficult, but I think that the way that they are able to dispense information and get people acclimated to this world, just something as simple as like showing the poster of presidents with Robert Redford in the background and then having a kid mention the idea of Redfordations almost immediately after. Just great delineation of information, a great twist with Don Johnson. So you can make an argument for so many of these episodes being really good. I still think episode 6 is by far the best, and that's okay. I think that is perfectly acceptable. That you can have all these great shows, but still have one that stands out. Favorite performance? This one we might disagree on, Brian. I think there's a lot of really good ones. I think I know what you're going to go with, though.
Yeah, I'm gonna say Tim Blake Nelson, but it's really tough. It's like 1A, 1B with him and Angela Abar. I mean, it's just Regina King. It's tough, man, because she's in every episode and she carries so much weight of that character and the history and all that stuff. But like I said, that episode 5, I was just haunted. You know what I mean? It was just haunting to see him go through all that stuff, and then especially the stuff at his house where he just feels like he has to like create all these things like like a bunker and all that stuff. Feels like he's going crazy, but he's just trying to like pretend that everyone else is normal kind of thing. And that was really the haunting part about it to me. So it's 1A and 1B.
I think this is a really hard one for me because I go back and forth between Regina King and Jean Smart. I think what Jean Smart does as Laurie Blake is very good. She brings a certain tone to the show that I think is desperately needed. Like the fact that she is so cynical and the fact that she is just over it. I love characters like that on really good shows because I just think the energy that they bring is so distinct. But I have to give it to Regina King. Just for a man walks into a bar, just for that episode alone, what she is able to do, she has to go through such an arc. She learns about her grandfather. She goes through this entire investigation. In so many ways, she has to be the emotional centerpiece. She is also, in a lot of ways, the action set piece for so much of what's happening. So there are a lot of great performances, but there's a reason that Regina King won the lead female performer in a limited series Emmy Award for this season, and I think episode 8 justifies it alone. So I'm going to go with Regina King, but and Jean Smart a very strong runner-up, and Tim Blake Nelson is certainly someone that I think gets a lot of credit as well. Let's get to question number 3. Should there be a season 2? You are allowed one word, Brian, yes or no, and then there'll be a follow-up.
No.
I would say no. Hypothetically, Brian, if there was a season 2, what should it be about? And the way I'm asking this question, Brian, is we both don't want a season 2. But what would make you interested in a season 2?
Probably if you wait 5 years from now, like now, 2020, so you split 2025, and see where we are, there's a story to be told where I think Adrian Veidt is in jail and some kind of pandemic happens where you can play around with that or something because it's, you got to take from real life. and somehow Adrian Veidt has to come up with like some kind of cure or something like that, where I think Veidt might go on a redemption arc. That's kind of where I see a possible season two, and Angela Abar kind of in the background, the way you had Doctor Manhattan in the background, and kind of reveal her as, I guess, the new Doctor Manhattan, but you do that later on, and kind of you avoid her character altogether until a certain point, and then it's like, oh, she's back, kind of thing. But that's kind of what I have in mind.
I would very much like to go completely away from these characters. I think we talked a little bit about Vietnam. That is where I would like to see the show go, is to have perhaps Vietnam American or Vietnamese American writers, perhaps people from Vietnam on the writing staff as well. That's what I want to see. I want to see the show take place in Vietnam and tell that story. You could do some of the story during the war, what happened with Dr. Manhattan, some of what happened afterward. That is what I want to see from this show. And it's really the only way that I would be interested. I don't really have a lot of interest in following up the story of Angela Abar because I think that story has been told. I also think when it comes to telling this story, there really isn't a lot more to do with Adrian Veidt. So my preference at this point is to just, if we are going to go with the season two, to go with something that is just so completely different in my mind. So that's where I'm going. All right, let's get to the fifth and final question. Is this the greatest superhero television season ever made? Based on what you've seen, Brian.
Yes, and I've seen a lot of like really hyped superhero shows. I've seen about half the Arrowverse shows. I'm a big fan of the Flash, but nothing comes close. And you could argue the Boys is almost at this level right now. I would say the Boys is like a solid 8.5 out of 10 right now, and this is like a 10 out of 10. So it's getting there because season two is very strong, and you could argue that we can probably review seasons 1 and 2 of The Boys on their own, which we may or may not do next year, 2021. We'll see, because that's the only other show I can think of in terms of superhero shows that are worthy of maybe Pantheon level. So if I were to rank them, I'd say Watchmen, and then maybe season 2 of The Boys, number 3, season 1 of The Boys, and then number 4, I got a shout out to The Flash season 2. I thought that's the best season of The Flash by far, and I've seen every single season, and I've shit on a lot of other seasons, but I feel like season 2 was just all the gears were clicking, everything was clicking, and the whole storyline with the Flash and his dad was clicking, and everything was just working in that season. So that's, even though that's more of the CW level, I still feel like some shows can almost get to that level based on how deeply invested you are in the story, and that's how I felt about Splash.
I want to give a shout out to Harley Quinn, the show that we have discussed before on this podcast, but I would definitely like to do a follow-up at some point to talk about both seasons 1 and 2. The show has also been renewed for a season 3, which I'm very excited about, so hopefully we can get into that conversation at some point, but very good stuff all around. I would say that yes, as things stand right now, I think because the show has a budget, it was allowed to be the best television season ever made, and I appreciate the fact that it is 9 episodes, that it is not 22 episodes. I would like to have seen it maybe be more, but we've already had that conversation. So that's about it, Brian. Any final thoughts? This was a great way to kind of return to this format of the show, but we will return to it at some point, Brian. But are there any final thoughts that you have on Watchmen before we move on?
It made me appreciate the graphic novel even more, you know what I mean? And I thought the movie would be enough for me, the movie and the graphic novel, but this is a follow-up, just kind of makes you appreciate it even more. And it's got a similar thing with right now with The Mandalorian, and how people are looking back at like the shows of Rebels and Clone Wars and appreciating that more. I think that's kind of what happened with me in terms of the comic, because I went back and I was trying to look at details, and I was like, didn't Hood of Justice die when you first hear his name? And then you look it up in the comic, and it's like, oh yeah, they have the backstory, and then things start clicking, and you start putting things together. So I really appreciate that aspect of it all, where you can kind of go back. It was a week between episodes, so you were looking back at all these clues and stuff, and all these breakdowns that I was going through on YouTube. So it was a really fun time. A year ago, I know it seems so long ago, but it was a year ago when this kind of wrapped up. So I just enjoy the experience. Now, right now, as of this recording, it's all about Mandalorian and what's going to happen at Thursday at midnight for the finale and that kind of thing. So that's kind of where we're at right now in terms of streaming and shows like that.
Definitely. And what we're going to do now is we are going to stay in the streaming realm. Brian, all I can say is we have been waiting a year to review a big superhero movie, just about a year. I think we reviewed the Harley Quinn movie, but we actually get to review a contemporary superhero movie that has a budget and is based off of IP and appears to be really good. Right now, I'm very excited to be reviewing Wonder Woman 1984.
My life hasn't been what you probably think it has. We all have our struggles.
Have you ever been in love?
A long, long time ago. You?
So many times. Yeah, all the time.
Welcome to the future. Life is good, but it can be better. And why shouldn't it be? All you need is to want it. Think about finally having everything you always wanted.
I can save today, but you can save the world.
Steve.
Diane.
All right, Brian, we have been through the ringer this year, as I know so many people who are listening to this probably have, and this was kind of our reward at the end of the year, the fact that we got to see Wonder Woman streaming on HBO Max. We did not have to risk our lives going to the theater, as apparently some people did that over Christmas weekend. Brian and I definitely did not do that. We both watched it on HBO Max. And there is a whole discussion to be had about what Warner Brothers / HBO Max is doing. This is not really going to be the podcast for that, because it will take us into a lot of other directions that I just don't feel comfortable doing. I really want our concentration and focus to be on the movie itself, since we have had very few 2020 superhero movies, with the exception of Birds of Prey and The Old Guard. We really haven't had a big superhero movie. We don't know when Black Widow's going to be released. We know that WandaVision will be coming out on January the 15th, the first episode. And then we're going to be in a nice little groove. Regardless of the theatrical situation, we are basically going to have potentially five Marvel television shows airing on Disney+. So we do have that to look forward to. And with HBO Max, with Wonder Woman 1984, a sequel to the much complimented 2017 Wonder Woman, which is generally believed to be the best of the DCEU, which includes a number of Zack Snyder projects that have a mixed reaction at best. That also now includes Aquaman and Shazam. Brian, I know that this was a movie that you were anticipating. It's one that I was anticipating, and quite frankly, to say the response has been mixed is an understatement, as there are critics who really love this movie, and a lot of there has been a distinct backlash, and I think a lot of the critiques of the critical situation has been that perhaps some critics who are more friendlier to these type of movies were allowed to see it first, and that's why the Rotten Tomatoes score has just gone down precipitously over the course of these last few weeks. And I think we can also have the conversation about access. That's not something that I think we really need to get into either. But Brian, where do you come down? I'm going to let you give your thoughts, so your big picture thoughts on Wonder Woman 1984.
Okay, so I don't hate it. It's good for what it is, but there's a lot of plot issues, and I think a lot of the issues are in the script. Performances are great. I think Pedro Pascal was borderline almost incredible, because he's doing it's almost like he's doing Jim Carrey, and that's the comparison that I've kind of seen with other people too, just over the top, just chewing up scenery with the bad dialogue that he has, but he's just going with it, and then he looks crazier and crazier as he goes along. I thought Pedro Pascal was the best acting job. Kristen Wiig I thought did a great job as well, except I don't even think we needed to go full cheetah, to be honest, because she got what she wanted pretty much, and then she had another wish on top of the wish that she only got. I don't know. It was weird with the rule stuff too. Chris Pine had no reason to be in this movie; they just wanted him back. And there's a whole other litany of issues with that thing because we didn't even know as an audience that they were doing the whole body swap thing, right? Chris Pine isn't just back. Steve Trevor's not just back. He inhabits the body of some dude, and we got like this Quantum Leap esque, and they just buried the lead on that totally. And like that's a whole other like plot of for a whole other Wonder Woman movie you can do of just like Steve Trevor resurrected as a ghost in the body of someone else, but they combine it with like two other movies. So that's a big issue because now you got the Cheetah movie going on in this movie, and then you got the Maxwell Lord movie going on in this movie, and they're just trying to do so much, but they just didn't land the mark. And I get what they were doing with the whole 1980. The look did look good, like 1984. I like the beginning; it was very like a Die Hard kind of opening. Despite the movie having two openings, I honestly think the opening with Diana as a kid had just been left in the original movie. It felt like that was just a leftover scene from the original movie, and they just tagged it on, I guess. But I guess they shot it footage. But I thought that was kind of weird. But I guess, Patty Jenkins argued to have it in there as a way to kind of show the arc of Diana in this movie about her and learning to not take shortcuts and blah, blah, blah. And that's the whole thing with The Wish is about taking shortcuts. And I get that. But I don't know, two openings is what it is. I wanted more music drops. You know what I mean? Like if you're gonna do an '80s movie, you do like the soundtrack, like Stranger Things does, or a lot of these ode to the '80s movies. But they only had like one song, I think, which was like a Frankie Goes to Hollywood remix, and they didn't even have Blue Monday, which was the big song that everyone loved in the trailer. So just a lot of things going on that they teased that they didn't really pay off. Just a lot of things that didn't pay off, and I felt like they just, with the trailer actually getting everyone hyped, and I'm glad they put it on streaming and whatnot, but it just felt like this movie was on the shelf for a year and they didn't touch it at all, and I felt like they had a lot of issues that they just left on the shelf.
I think the thing that is always going to stick with me is the plot issues. Fundamentally, I don't think that the plot of this movie works, and I think that is such an issue. And there are times when Marvel movies have not had the plot work, but I still think that there are other things that kind of make up for it, whether it be a cool action set piece or something like that. I don't even think this movie had a really good. This movie did not have a good action set piece. I think the thing that really bothered me is that you really only see Wonder Woman 3 times throughout this movie. You see her for 2 minutes at the beginning, then you go almost an hour and a half before seeing that sequence in Egypt that I think was just very clunky. And a lot of the CGI just felt weightless, and I think that those are kind of where my critiques begin, is just, how do you have this movie that you've delayed for basically a year? This movie was originally supposed to come out Christmas of 2019. It got bumped to June, then August, and October, and I don't know if this movie has been sitting on the shelf, but I don't understand how the CGI can look this bad on a movie where you are presumably spending $200 to $250 million. Like, if you are expecting this movie to make $1 billion, which at one point, that is something that they assumed, then you have to make this movie look good. And we have seen Warner Brothers movies with special effects look very good. I think Shazam is a very good example of that. I think the visual effects in Shazam are really, really good. I feel the same about Aquaman. I feel like most of the effects in Aquaman work very well. I don't understand why the effects in this movie, right from the first opening scene that you mentioned with young Diana, and just the way that was executed. And I really did not like the fact that there were 2 opening scenes, because basically what happens is you get 10 minutes of young Diana back in the Amazonian world, and it's just this really strange thing because she is very clearly more talented and a better athlete than the other women that she's competing against, and she gets accused of taking a shortcut. I mean, I did not read the scene that way. I read that scene as, yes, she got knocked off that horse, but she's actually showing a lot of ingenuity by taking, I think, a harder path. Like, she slides down that dirt path, and I would argue that's more difficult than what the other people were doing. And it just, fundamentally, the movie did not work for me from the beginning, and it consistently, I think, missed its mark. I mentioned to you, I think that this movie inhabits a lot of the worst of DC in many ways. Like, to me, the Kristen Wiig casting reminded me so much of Richard Pryor in Superman 3 in that it fundamentally did not work. And I think she was woefully miscast in this role. And I don't think her performance is very good. And, I walked into this with an open mind because we know that comedians in the past have done a very good job of being in these superhero movies. Like, there are so many examples, probably the most famous being Michael Keaton, who is a comedic actor, was Batman, and it worked out really, really well. I don't think this worked out well. I don't know if this was a writing problem, whether this was a directing problem, or whether it was a miscast, but I don't think that she brought the physicality that was needed to the role. And I also think that it's a writing problem because I don't think the character of Barbara was very well rendered. And this brings it to another problem, is that you have two villains. I don't understand why every superhero movie is obsessed with this idea that we have to have two villains in every movie. And it really bothers me because it's clunky. I think that there are some movies that have kind of made it work, but that's almost despite itself. And I really wish that we could get to a point with these superhero movies where we are focusing on one villain and one villain only. I think this movie would have been so much better if we were either we focused our attention on Maxwell Lord and gave his backstory earlier, and if you are going to try to give him pathos, give him pathos. But if not, then focus on Barbara. And I think that those are kind of where my issues stand with this movie. There are other things that I would like to get into because I really did not like this movie. I really was just bothered by it from the opening scene. I did not like the performances as much. I think the few highlights that there are came in the chemistry that continue to exist between Chris Pine and Gal Gadot. I just think that a lot of this movie just felt like nonsense. And this undoubtedly is one of the biggest disappointments for me of 2020 as far as movies and TV shows, which is amazing because another one of my biggest disappointments is Tenet. And it's remarkable to think if these two movies had come out during the summer, I think the narrative surrounding Warner Brothers is just what are they doing with their big blockbusters and just the disappointments that those two movies have been.
For me, I think the whole Barbara, the way that she's written, the whole cheetah thing, it's just so similar to Electro. It's similar to Poison Ivy and Batman and Robin, or even Jim Carrey, like I mentioned before, as the Riddler. It's like these geeky, mousy characters that get shunned and they just want to be loved by people, and then all of a sudden they have to change themselves. And you know what I mean? It's like, why do the geeks and nerds have to go through this trope almost all the time and then become the villain? It's kind of messed up, and I'm just sick of it. And they did it here, and we knew they were going to do it based on the trailer, but I was hoping they would kind of alter the path a little bit, but they didn't do that at all, and that was really disappointing. So I'm just tired of that arc that these have to go through, and some of these villains, I know not all the DC and MCU movies do this, but they do this. It's just kind of like, man, you're taking a really probably good person at heart and turning him into a villain when they don't need to be a villain, and I just hate it when they do that. And I think it was way worse with Electro and Jamie Foxx, but at least for me, Kristen Wiig did what she could with this role, and I wasn't totally disappointed with it as you were, but I'm just disappointed. And then the whole thing with Maxwell Lord is that I didn't really pick up on this until the end, but when they were doing his flashback of him as a kid, and I was just like, so of course he changed his name, and he's not born Maxwell Lord, but there's a whole other story there. You know what I mean? They kind of touched on it, but the whole idea of whitewashing and how Pedro Pascal in this movie and how he changed his name to be more acceptable in American culture, that's a real thing that a lot of people coming from different cultures come to the States that go through that, and they change their name just to be more accepted. And there's these little things on race that they kind of touched on, but they didn't fully go with. And I was like, damn, that's the story to tell right there with Max Lord. That's a really big deal with a lot of different races coming to America and adapting, and you kind of just brushed over that. You know what I mean? And I thought that was a big plot element of Maxwell Lord that they should have focused on. They just kind of brushed over with, and that was really disappointing. And then the stuff in the Middle East was kind of like, wow, you know what I mean? They're really doing the whole 80s uh, Arab oil stereotyping and all that stuff, and it just,
I mean, it was I could not believe that they went to Egypt and that was their focus. That what they focused on in the Arab world was oil and nuclear weapons and things like that. I mean, you want to talk about retrograde racial politics. That's what this movie had, and fundamentally, I think that's the reason that I hate this movie so much. It would be one thing if the plot was bad, but you've also got this issue as well. That is a part of it, and it was very bad. And I think the other thing that I think I was struck by that was pretty offensive to my sensibilities. Brian, can you believe that issues of consent were actually addressed for both genders in this movie in really kind of gross ways?
yeah, I know. Especially, well, they didn't even address the one with the quantum leap issue because that's sexual assault, I guess, because the guy didn't even know he was having sex with Gal Gadot. But I don't know. It's nuts.
That is an issue of consent 100%, because the person that Steve has taken over did not consent to anything, the kissing, the sex that undoubtedly happened. And they also go to Egypt and he puts his body on the line. And even when they separate, Brian, like, where do they separate? They don't separate in an apartment or in a very safe place. They kiss and separate, and she relinquishes her wish based on just like right in the middle of a riot, basically. And then they see each other at the end of the movie, and she clearly recognizes him. He does not recognize her, and it's just so weird. And I think the other thing that really bothered me, so I mentioned that it was for both genders, and I mentioned that because the reason, so Barbara basically does her big heel turn toward the beginning of the movie, but it's after a sexual assault. And like, then we see her talking to that same dude later on, and the way that they portray this guy is just this cartoonishly evil rapist, and it's so weird. And I didn't know what the movie was going for, because it at times is going for this very light tone, and even in those moments where you have this guy who's trying to assault her, even in those moments, it just feels like it's still like this cartoonish type thing. And I don't know. It was bizarre. And I understand that DC has gone away from the Zack Snyder of it all, and I think in a lot of ways that's a good thing, because most of Wonder Woman does take place during the day. There are a lot of bright colors, and they're not saturating like they used to. But in some ways, I think that is a hindrance to this movie, because they're kind of going for something that's more sophisticated, and I don't think that this is a movie that it's Wonder Woman 1984, and it feels like they're going for this Richard Donner Superman feel, but we have moved past that, and we can't go back in time. Just like with Superman Returns, we can't go back to 1978 and pretend like we don't have this entire history and this contextualization of things. And also the fact that when we look back at the 1980s, like, there are a lot of issues that the Reagan presidency brings up as far as drugs, HIV, and AIDS, and this is just not the movie for it. And it felt really inappropriate.
Yeah, and then, it wasn't even Ronald Reagan. It was some other alt-world president, but still, like, it just felt like they tried to do so much into this movie. Again, multiple writers. Jeff Johns maybe should stop contributing to some of these. I don't know, but I wouldn't put the blame on Patty Jenkins. I think she did, what she could, and in terms of directing, I think she did what she could. It's just the plot that's all over the place and wacky and stuff, and the fact that by the end of the movie, Maxwell Lord, I mean, in the beginning, he absorbs the quote-unquote wish stone, right? By the end of the movie, he relinquishes. He's still like, like, he's still out there probably giving people wishes, I think. Because there was no resolution to that. There was no resolution to the fact that they said there was this, evil Greek god that put a curse on the stone. We never even got to know who that god was. They just threw it out there and didn't even mention a name. They also mentioned Asteria, the quote legendary Amazon that we didn't even hear about until the second one, and she found her armor, and somehow the armor is getting picked apart by Cheetah, and that was the same armor that kept Asteria alive for thousands of years on Earth. Just weird shit like that. I did like the Linda Carter cameo. That got me, that popped me. But I was like, man, why wasn't the movie about, you know, dying, looking for her to get help because she's losing her powers because of this wish thing? To me, that made more sense. And a lot of people putting like, well, I thought that she was going to use the armor because she's losing her powers, but then she gave up. She gave up Steve Trevor again, and then got hers back, but then ended up wearing the suit anyway. So I don't know what they were going for there. It just kind of like didn't add up to what it should have paid off to. And with the whole chemistry with Chris Pine and Gal Gadot, like it's just, yeah, we loved it from the first movie, but it had placement here. It felt like we needed to see Diana be vulnerable and alone. But then again, it's like I've heard even complaints, and I've read different like both male and female, like what is this woman still pining over this dude for 70 years? You know what I mean? And it was like a first love and whatever, but moves on from it, and then all of a sudden she meets Barbara and decides to go out to dinner for the first. It's weird, just all the timing of everything just doesn't really add up too well. And the look, it does have its, like I said, the look is very 80s, but half the movie you're not even thinking like, oh wow, this is like totally 80s. It's just standard plot. They probably could have put this in this in the 90s even. I don't know why, but I guess with the 80s you have these expectations now, especially with Stranger Things, and it just didn't pay off with these expectations. So like I said, I don't hate it. I just was really disappointed with some of the race issues and like the plot stuff. But if I were to like put this on in the background while folding laundry one random day, I'll probably do that. And when Black Friday comes around, I'll probably buy it again for $5 like I did the other DVDs and add them to the collection, despite me being begrudgingly against some of them. But I think there's far worse out there. Justice League is far worse, but to me, this was just, they tried to do so much, and I think Patty Jenkins wanted to do this whole, Richard Donner tribute thing, but it didn't really clash with some of the ideas that were presented. So it's kind of a mishmash on a lot of things, but, credit to Pedro Pascal, man, because despite the crappy dialogue, he was just going crazy in this movie. There wasn't even a resolution or explanation as to why that his body was seemingly falling apart. And then when he got the wish stone absorbed, he was falling apart even more. But then by the end of the movie, he's totally fine. And he randomly finds his kid outside in the middle of a yard. I don't know what's going on. The third act is pretty like almost borderline off the rails, but I don't know. It's, to me, it's kind of like whatever, it's disappointing. It's just considering that, Wonder Woman 1 was just so well put together, despite having issues in the third act as well. But this kind of felt like they had all these things going for them, and then they just missed the mark. So
Yeah, I would say that this was just an enormous disappointment, and I think that is reflected by the Chinese box office. The fact that this movie really did not make any money in its second weekend. And I think a lot of that is because of the negative feedback. And undoubtedly, a lot of people are going to be able to watch this because of HBO Max. So what makes this successful is going to be really difficult because it's not going to make $1 billion. It is going to undoubtedly cause a lot of people to sign up for HBO Max, and I have no doubt that people have done that. But I think that from a film perspective, I just was very disappointed, and I'm a little bit concerned about a potential third Wonder Woman and what that is going to look like, because I don't know if the problem is Patty Jenkins. I don't know if it's Jeff Johns. I don't know if it's the other credited screenwriter, but this movie was a mess, and I think the biggest problem that DC has versus Marvel is that Marvel is a well-oiled machine, and even if there are problems, Kevin Feige is there and is a crucial voice and a sensible voice. I do not get that impression with DC, and I think that's why DC has been very hit or miss. And I don't know if hiring one person is necessarily a solution, but I think Wonder Woman 3 needs to have a singular voice. And if that's Patty Jenkins, then that's great. If you need to bring in a different female screenwriter, I think that would also be extremely helpful. to not just have two dudes writing it. I think maybe even bringing a writer who is not white would also make a huge difference and add some much needed perspective to whatever is happening in the third movie. But I don't know. I just did not enjoy this as much as I thought I would, and that's really all there is to say. I think there's some there's some fun scenes between Chris Pine and Gal Gadot, but that's it. Like, I'm really just struggling to remember like really memorable like set pieces or action sequences because I just don't think they exist, and I think that's really unfortunate because the first Wonder Woman I think had some truly iconic moments and scenes like the walk across no man's land and like some of the scenes even in the Amazon, like just they were so well done and so well executed, and the action scenes in this movie just were bad, and it's really weird. I mean, that final set, the final battle between Cheetah and Wonder Woman, I think in particular was a huge problem because Cheetah, it looked like it was like Cats all over again, just with the digital fur and just how weird it looked, and how the payoff was electrocuting her. So yeah, I mean, I walked away very disappointed, and I think Pedro Pascal certainly gets an A for effort, but I think that the way the character is done, I mean, I just think that nobody was going to be totally successful, and I would say that about the other actors as well. And while I understand I understand that the first Wonder Woman had, Steve and Diana as kind of the centerpiece and just what great chemistry they had. I can't help but think, what if Steve was not in this movie? Like, what if you take Chris Pine out of this movie and you actually put the focus on Diana and have her focus and maybe have one villain instead of two, and maybe you build up Cheetah for the third movie? Like, I can't help but think how much better this movie would be if you eliminated Cheetah as a villain, maybe keep Barbara around, and take the focus off of Steve and Diana and give Diana a purpose beyond just this one dude that she knew for a month 70 years ago.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like the Cheetah thing, like she was fine as before she even went full Cheetah. I don't even think she should have gone full Cheetah. It didn't need to be done story wise. Like she already got what she wanted. She's just as powerful as Diana. For some reason, she wanted to be an apex predator, and I kept thinking, like, what the fuck does Randy Orton have to do with anything? And then, like, apex predator, like, why even choose those words? It made no sense. Like, she had no reason to become a full Cheetah. Like, I don't know. Like, I feel like, yeah, you gotta, be loyal to the comics. Yeah, it's cool. I saw the Super Friends when I was a kid, and I saw Cheetah and all the villains and stuff, but I felt like there was no reason to go full Cheetah in this movie. And, yeah, save it for the next one. And then make her the villain as the super baddie in the next one, and have, like, maybe instead of her being so nerdy, make her strong and powerful like Diana too, and have them have like a bond. You know what I mean? And it's these two strong-willed women that kind of break up by virtue of something else, not because she was a nerd and they got rejected and then wanted to be Diana. Like that shit's got to go. That's like this trope that I think it's got to go in like superhero movies. Make these two strong female characters together. And then, maybe have him team up against, Maxwell Lord and not have her go full Cheetah. And then at the end of the movie, then she goes kind of crazy or something. But I don't know. There's a lot to be desired, and just some weird stuff too. Like, I don't know if anyone noticed this except me, maybe my friend who's a big fan of the Batman vs Superman soundtrack. For some odd reason, they played the Batman theme at the end of Wonder Woman, where the dude's like attached to the big blue light, right, that you hate, like the fucking thing from the Riddler and Batman Forever, that headpiece thing. And then for some reason they start playing the Batman theme from the beginning of Batman vs Superman. I'm like, oh my god, are they gonna cut to like Bruce Wayne right now? And no, they just ripped the music cue. So I don't know what the heck was going on there, but I don't know.
It's Hans Zimmer repeating himself, probably, is what happened.
But usually there's a reason for it, unless I don't know. But then again, you've been on the shelf for the movie's been on the shelf for a year. You couldn't come up with another music cue instead of reusing the one from the Batman vs Superman movie. I don't know. Again, the whole soundtrack to this was left to be desired. For the one Frankie Goes to Hollywood song, I guess.
So yeah, that is Wonder Woman 1984. We will probably come back and do another episode about it where we will determine whether it goes into the Pantheon, the pile of shame, or the folding laundry category, which I guess that's a new category for us. Is this movie worth folding your laundry to? Is a really important question, and for Brian, I guess it's good enough, but for me, it's not. I was just hugely disappointed by this movie. I think it's I mean, I've seen Tenet and Wonder Woman and was just incredibly disappointed by both. And it's really sad because there have also been like other movies like I saw Soul and I really like Soul, and I saw Ma Rainey's Black Bottom and I really like that. And these two major releases from Warner Brothers were just aggressively disappointing.
Well, in regards to Tenet, that's a whole different discussion. When I saw it in the drive-in in August, I was kind of more relieved that I was able to have some kind of theater experience, regardless of the circumstances. But I did enjoy it when I did see it the first time. And I felt like a Bond movie. And Christopher Nolan's never going to be able to do a Bond movie, so I was just kind of like, okay, I've accepted that this is the Christopher Nolan Bond movie, and of course it's good in sci-fi. And yeah, I kind of understood it. I didn't really overthink it.
All right, Brian. So originally we were supposed to do the month. So we had a planned series for November and December. Those plans got postponed because of real life things. But January we are going to do something very special. It is Brian's turn to do a month of his chosen theme. Brian, why don't you tell the listeners what the theme is and what we are going to be discussing next week?
So to kind of throw in a little wrestling reference, I'm a tournament mark, quote unquote, King of the Ring, old school King of the Ring, Battle of Los Angeles, the usual wrestling tournament stuff. So I want to kind of bring that into the movie. And then little did I realize until late year that, a lot of these Enter the Dragon type movies follow the same kind of tournament format kind of thing going on with the plot. So with Mortal Kombat coming out in April, this seems like the right time to do it. So we're gonna review a bunch of martial arts tournament movies, except for one. We're out with Enter the Dragon, the granddaddy of them all, that kind of started it all with Bruce Lee, Jim Kelly, and all these different people. It's just a total 70s throwback, and I think you're going to enjoy it because the opening logo is the classic Warner Brothers logo. Next up, we're going to go to Bloodsport, which is the Van Damme version of it all, the version. There's a lot of similarities, but I think the soundtrack in Bloodsport kind of overtakes Enter the Dragon a bit because of that 80s-ness. And then from there, we go to the one from the 90s, the one that we all know, Mortal Kombat, which is essentially just another remake of the previous two, done so well, I think, in a way where it connects with the 90s kind of culture, and we'll talk about that later. But Mortal Kombat was all the rage in terms of video games, and when the movie came out, I think it just kind of clicked with everybody because it kind of felt similar, not too stupid, but, Mortal Kombat is one of those classic underrated gems, I think, that people kind of overlook, but not in terms of masterpiece, but I think it's like one of those popcorn movies that people kind of underrate and take for granted sometimes. And then we're going to end it with a Western. And I know that doesn't really make sense. How are you going to do a martial arts tournament in a Western? Well, Quick and the Dead. It's a Sam Raimi movie. Not a lot of people know about it, but it is a gunslinger tournament. So it is a tournament of gunslingers, and you got Leonardo DiCaprio, Titanic. You got Sharon Stone in the lead role. Sharon Stone's playing the lone gunman in a female lone gunman in the 90s in a Western. I think that's incredibly unique and very hard to find. And then you got Sam Raimi directing it all. You got Lance Hendrickson. You got probably all these other people I'm forgetting right now, but an incredible cast of characters. And it's just a tournament of gunslingers and all these different personalities. So it's tournament month. Every movie is going to be about a tournament. And we're going to start with the original tournament and Enter the Dragon and talk about Bruce Lee and the history of him in Hollywood and how pretty much, Kung Fu, that show, got taken away from him, and this kind of set him on the path to Enter the Dragon. So I'm looking forward to talking about that.
All right, so that is very exciting. I also want to send a special shout out here at the end of this podcast to Matt Waters. Matt Waters is taking a break from podcasting, but he has put a lot of work. He is the reason that you are able to listen to these podcasts. He is the reason that you are able to read my articles on Enter the Real World. So I just wanted to send a special shout out and a thank you to Matt Waters for all the work that he's put in. And he is going to be taking a break from podcasting for the next few months because 2020 has been a dumpster fire, not just in the United States, but everywhere around the world. So I hope he enjoys his break. And who knows, once this pandemic ends, I will probably be taking a break from podcasting as well. But that will not come until later in the year. We definitely have some plans for these first few months. So thank you very much, Brian. As always, thank you to everyone for listening, and we will talk to you next week.
Oh, we didn't talk about Don Johnson's musical career. Oh well.